Eleanor Wright's blind date never showed up, but the desperate single father who appeared at her table begging for the empty seat to save his daughter's birthday would change her billion-dollar life forever. What began as one act of kindness spiraled into love, lies, and a truth that nearly destroyed them both. When Caleb discovered the woman he'd fallen for wasn't just successful, but a billionaire CEO hiding her identity, everything shattered. Could love survive across an impossible divide, or would wealth destroy what poverty had built? This is the story of an empty chair that became a family. Thank you for joining me today. If this story touches your heart, please like this video and comment with your city below so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. Now, let's begin. The candle had burned halfway down. Eleanor Wright watched the wax pool and drip, golden rivulets sliding down white pillar wax in slow, hypnotic patterns that seemed to mock the passage of time. 43 minutes. She'd been sitting at this table for 43 minutes, watching couples lean close over shared appetizers, hearing the gentle murmur of conversation and laughter that filled Marcello's on a Friday night in late September. The restaurant had been her choice. Upscale but not ostentatious, the kind of place with cream-colored tablecloths and soft lighting that made everyone look beautiful. Marcello's had a reputation for romance, for first dates that became anniversaries, for proposals whispered over tiramisu. The website even featured testimonials from couples who'd met their forever here. Eleanor had thought it was perfect. Neutral ground. A public space where she could meet David, a software consultant her assistant had assured her was normal, stable, and completely unaware of who you are. That last part had been the selling point. She glanced at her phone again. 8:47 p.m. No messages, no missed calls. Just the same home screen she'd checked 9 times already, showing a photo of the Seattle skyline at sunset that her photographer had captured from her office window. The waiter approached for the third time, his expression carefully neutral, professionally blank in that way good servers mastered when dealing with the awkward reality of someone being stood up. "Miss, can I get you anything else while you wait?" His accent was Italian, probably authentic given that Marcello himself still worked the kitchen most nights. "Perhaps an appetizer?" "No, thank you." Eleanor's voice was steady, controlled. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught her to never let anyone see uncertainty. "Just a few more minutes." He nodded and retreated, but she caught the sympathetic glance he exchanged with the hostess. They knew. Everyone knew. The woman at table 7 had been abandoned, left waiting with 2 wine glasses and 1 empty chair that seemed to grow more conspicuous with each passing minute. Eleanor reached for her wine, a Pinot Grigio she'd barely touched, and took a careful sip. The glass left a ring of condensation on the white tablecloth. She stared at it, watching water soak into expensive fabric, and felt something crack inside her chest. This was supposed to be different. She'd followed all the rules this time. Used a fake last name on the dating app. Chosen a profile picture that showed her in casual clothes, laughing at a friend's wedding, looking like any other 34-year-old woman hoping to meet someone genuine. She'd answered David's messages herself. No assistant screening, no background check beyond basic safety protocols. She'd wanted authentic. She'd wanted real. She'd wanted to be chosen for herself, not for the 9-figure net worth in the corner office that made her one of the youngest CEOs in the country. Eleanor Wright Holdings owned commercial real estate across 14 states. The company bore her name, her real name, in letters that topped 3 buildings in downtown Seattle alone. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes twice, Fortune 3 times, and she'd given a TED Talk about sustainable development that had 8 million views. She employed 4,000 people. She'd built an empire before she'd turned 35, and she couldn't get a man to show up for a first date. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, could reduce experienced investors to stammering deference with a single raised eyebrow, could command a conference room full of men twice her age with absolute authority. But sitting here, waiting for someone who clearly wasn't coming, she felt like a teenager at prom watching her date dance with someone else. Eleanor set down the wine glass with careful precision and reached for her purse. Enough. She'd given him 50 minutes, which was 40 minutes more than dignity required. She'd leave cash for the wine and the waiter's trouble, walk out with her head high, and add this to the growing list of reasons why dating was a waste of time she didn't have. Her phone buzzed. Hope flared bright and desperate for exactly 2 seconds before she saw the name on the screen. Marcus Chen, her CFO. She let the call go to voicemail. Whatever crisis demanded her attention could wait until Monday. She'd promised herself this weekend off, promised her assistant Rebecca that she'd actually try to have a personal life instead of sleeping in her office again. Fat lot of good that promise had done. Eleanor stood smoothing her dress, a simple navy sheath that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, but looked understated enough to pass for department store quality. She'd chosen it specifically to not intimidate, to not broadcast wealth. Another careful calculation in a life that had become a series of strategic decisions designed to hide who she really was. She was reaching for the cash in her wallet when the restaurant's front door burst open with enough force to turn heads. A man stumbled through, practically dragging a little girl behind him. No, not dragging. The girl was pulling him, her small hand locked around his wrist, her face flushed with excitement and anxiety. They both looked windswept, disheveled, like they'd run several blocks. The man wore khaki pants and a button-down shirt that had probably started the evening crisp, but now looked rumpled. The girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wore a pink dress with a sparkly unicorn on the front and sneakers that lit up with each step. The hostess intercepted them immediately, her smile professional but firm. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "No, I did, but..." The man ran a hand through his dark hair, making it stand up in anxious spikes. His voice carried across the restaurant, raw with desperation. "I'm so sorry. I had a reservation for 7:30 under Brooks, but there was an accident on the bridge, and traffic was completely stopped and my phone died so I couldn't call. And I know we're over an hour late, but it's my daughter's birthday, and I promised her we'd come here because her mom used to talk about this place, and I'm sorry, sir." The hostess's voice was kind but unyielding. "We gave away your table when you missed your reservation window. We're completely booked for the evening." "Please." The word came out broken. The man, Brooks, apparently, gripped his daughter's hand tighter. "Please, there has to be something, anywhere. I know it's my fault for being late, but I promised Mila. I promised her." The little girl, Mila, stared up at the hostess with huge dark eyes that gleamed with unshed tears. She didn't say anything, but her disappointment was palpable, radiating outward in waves that seemed to affect everyone within a 10-foot radius. Eleanor watched this scene unfold from her table, cash still in her hand, frozen in the act of leaving. She saw the hostess glance around the packed restaurant, saw her shake her head with genuine regret. She saw the man's shoulders slump, saw him kneel down to his daughter's level and start to speak, probably forming words of apology that would somehow try to make this disappointment okay. And she saw the empty chair across from her. Later, Eleanor would analyze this moment from every angle, would try to understand the impulse that made her act. Was it empathy? Projection? Some recognition of her own loneliness reflected in a child's disappointed face? Or was it simpler than that? Just one human being seeing another in pain and having the power to help? She didn't know. She just knew what she did next. "Excuse me." Eleanor's voice cut through the hushed conversation at the entrance. She stepped forward, leaving her purse and coat at the table. "I have a table. For 2. But my companion isn't coming." The hostess turned, recognition flickering across her face, not of Eleanor specifically, but of the woman who'd been sitting alone for nearly an hour. "Oh, Miss Wright, you don't have to. I'd like to offer my table." Eleanor walked closer, each step feeling both terrifying and inevitable. She looked directly at the man, then down at his daughter. "If you'd like it. There's no point in it going to waste." The man stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Up close, Eleanor could see exhaustion in his face, worry etched into the lines around his eyes. But there was something else too, dignity, barely held together. Pride that was costing him everything to swallow by being here, begging for a table at a restaurant he probably couldn't afford. "I couldn't possibly," he started. "Please." Eleanor surprised herself with the word, with the genuine plea in her voice. She crouched down to Mila's level the way the man had done moments before. "Is it really your birthday?" Mila nodded, solemn. Her voice came out small and uncertain. I turned 8 today. 8 is important. Eleanor smiled, and it felt strange on her face. A real smile, not the practiced professional expression she deployed in meetings. When I turned 8, my grandmother took me to a fancy restaurant for the first time. I got to order whatever I wanted and stay up past my bedtime. I still remember it. It was true, though Eleanor hadn't thought about that memory in years. Her grandmother, her father's mother, the original Eleanor Wright, who'd started the company 60 years ago, had been stern and exacting, but she'd understood the importance of marking moments, making people feel special. Really? Mila's eyes widened slightly. Really? Eleanor stood, looking back at the father. My table is already set up. The candle's still burning. It seems like fate, honestly. You show up right when I have an extra seat. The man's throat worked as he swallowed hard. She watched him war with himself, pride versus love, independence versus his daughter's happiness. She recognized that battle. She fought different versions of it every day in boardrooms, weighing what she wanted against what was strategic, what felt right against what made sense. I'm Caleb, he said finally, the words seeming to cost him. Caleb Brooks. And this is Mila. Eleanor. She offered her hand and he shook it. His grip was firm, warm, calloused, in a way that suggested manual labor. Just Eleanor. The omission of her last name was deliberate. Wright would have been a neon sign, an invitation to Google her, to find the Forbes covers and the TED Talk and the buildings with her name on top. Just Eleanor could be anyone. Just Eleanor could be a woman having dinner, not a CEO with a net worth that would make this man's head spin. Thank you. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. Thank you so much. I promise we won't intrude on your evening. We'll just... Don't be ridiculous. Eleanor was already walking back to her table, gesturing for them to follow. It's not an intrusion. Honestly, you're saving me from looking pathetic sitting here alone. The hostess exchanged a glance with the waiter, the same one who'd asked Eleanor 3 times if she wanted an appetizer, and something passed between them. Permission, maybe, or just recognition that this strange act of kindness was happening whether they approved or not. Eleanor reclaimed her seat while Caleb helped Mila into the chair across from her, the chair that had been empty for 53 minutes. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, taking in the soft lighting and the other diners and the elegant place settings like she'd stepped into a palace. Have you been here before? Eleanor asked gently. Mila shook her head, then glanced at her father as if checking whether she should speak. Her mother used to work near here, Caleb said quietly, settling into the chair next to his daughter. Before, well, Sarah would tell Mila about the tiramisu at Marcello's, about how someday we'd all come here together for a special occasion. The past tense registered, before, used to, would tell. She passed away 2 years ago, Caleb added, seeing understanding dawn in Eleanor's face. His voice was steady, but Eleanor heard the weight in it, the grief that had probably settled into his bones and become something he carried every day. Breast cancer. By the time they caught it, it had already spread. I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Eleanor meant them. She'd lost her own mother at 12, a car accident that had come out of nowhere and rearranged her entire world. She knew about the specific kind of emptiness that death left behind. Thank you. Caleb opened his menu, clearly ready to move past the topic. But tonight isn't about sadness. Tonight is about Mila turning 8 and getting to try this tiramisu her mom promised her. Their waiter materialized at the table with impressive timing, his earlier sympathy replaced with professional efficiency. Good evening. My name is Antonio, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some drinks? Water's fine for both of us, Caleb said quickly. Eleanor saw him glance at the wine list, then away, and understood immediately. He was calculating costs, measuring what he could afford against what his pride would allow. This dinner was already more than he'd planned to spend. She could see it in the careful way he studied the menu, the subtle tension in his shoulders. Actually, Eleanor interjected, I'd love to order a bottle of wine, but I hate drinking alone, so I'll need help with it. She turned to Caleb with a smile that gave him an out, a way to accept without feeling like charity. Would you share? Nothing too fancy, just something to celebrate Mila's birthday properly. Caleb hesitated, and Eleanor could see him trying to read her intentions, searching for condescension or pity. She kept her expression open, friendly, the same face she used when negotiating deals where she needed the other party to think they had the upper hand. "That would be nice," he said finally. "Thank you." Eleanor ordered a mid-range Chianti, expensive enough to be good, but not so expensive that it would make Caleb uncomfortable. She'd learned to read price sensitivity in her early days building the company, when she was negotiating with contractors who were suspicious of a woman barely out of college trying to buy commercial properties. She'd learned to dress down, to drive a modest car, to make people feel like equals even when she was writing checks that dwarfed their annual income. She'd learned to hide. "So, Mila," Eleanor said as Antonio departed with their drink orders, 8 years old. That means you're in what, second grade?" "Third," Mila said, gaining confidence. "I skipped second grade because I already knew how to read chapter books, and my teacher said I needed advanced instruction." She pronounced the last 2 words carefully, like she was reciting something she'd heard adults say. "That's impressive." Eleanor's interest was genuine. She'd been the same way as a kid, reading years above her level, bored in regular classes, constantly seeking more. "What are you reading now?" Mila's entire face lit up. "The Chronicles of Narnia. I'm on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Lucy just met Mr. Tumnus, and he invited her to tea, and I think he's nice, but Daddy says—" "I said Mr. Tumnus seems nice, but we should wait and see," Caleb interrupted with a gentle smile. "Stories have a way of surprising you." "That's good advice." Eleanor watched the interaction between father and daughter, seeing the easy affection, the way they communicated with small gestures and shared glances. "My grandmother told me something similar. She said the best stories teach you to pay attention." "Your grandmother sounds smart," Mila said seriously. She was. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of emotion. Her grandmother had died 5 years ago, and sometimes Eleanor still reached for the phone to call her, to ask advice about a deal, or just to hear the voice that had been her compass through everything. "She taught me most of what I know." Antonio returned with their wine and took their orders. Caleb let Mila choose first. She pointed at the chicken parmesan with barely contained excitement, and then ordered the most basic pasta on the menu for himself. Eleanor ordered salmon, keeping her choice simple, unremarkable. As Antonio walked away, Caleb poured wine for Eleanor and himself with careful attention, filling both glasses exactly halfway. His hands were steady despite the obvious exhaustion in his face. "So, what do you do?" Eleanor asked, then immediately wished she could rephrase. The question felt too forward, too much like an interview. But Caleb didn't seem offended. "I'm a mechanic," he said. "I work at Davidson's Auto Repair about 3 miles from here. Been there 6 years now." A mechanic. Eleanor filed that information away, connecting it to the calluses on his hands, the faint smell of motor oil that she could detect beneath whatever soap he'd used to clean up. An honest trade. Manual labor. The kind of work where you got paid for what your hands could do, not what your name could command. "Do you like it?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "Most people ask if it pays well." "I assume it pays well enough, or you wouldn't do it. I'm asking if you like it." Caleb studied her for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "I do, actually. I like figuring out what's wrong with something and making it work again. I like when someone brings in a car that's been making a weird noise for months, and I can diagnose it in 20 minutes. There's something satisfying about problems that have clear solutions." Eleanor understood that feeling intimately. She felt the same way about complicated real estate deals, about finding the perfect property and turning it into something valuable. Problems with solutions, challenges with clear endpoints. "And you?" Caleb asked, turning the question back to her. "What do you do?" Eleanor had prepared for this question. She'd used the same answer on 4 previous first dates, all of which had ended in disaster once her real identity came out. "I work in real estate," she said, which was technically true. Property management mostly, very boring office work. Another technical truth packaged as a lie. She did manage properties. She just happened to own them first. "Doesn't sound boring," Mila piped up. She'd been carefully folding her napkin into increasingly complicated shapes, but now she looked at Eleanor with interest. "Do you help people find houses?" "Sometimes," Eleanor said, Mostly I make sure buildings are taken care of, that they're safe and nice for the people who live or work in them. That seems important. Mila's napkin had become a swan, or possibly a very abstract boat. Daddy says important work isn't always exciting work. Your daddy's right. Eleanor glanced at Caleb and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sometimes the most important things are the ones people don't notice until they're not there anymore, like a building's heat working in winter, or a car starting when you turn the key. Exactly. Caleb's voice was warm with approval. Mila, that's what I always tell you, remember? The important stuff is usually quiet. Their food arrived, carried by Antonio and a second server who appeared just to handle the logistics of 3 entrees. The plates were beautiful, artfully arranged, garnished with fresh herbs, the kind of presentation that justified Marcello's prices and reputation. Mila stared at her chicken parmesan like it was a work of art. Can I take a picture? To remember? Of course. Caleb pulled out an older model smartphone, the kind with a cracked screen protector and a case held together with clear tape. He angled it to capture Mila's plate, the glowing candle, his daughter's delighted smile. Eleanor saw him snap several shots, making sure he had one where the lighting was perfect. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that spoke to contentment rather than awkwardness. Eleanor watched Caleb cut Mila's chicken into smaller pieces without being asked, saw the little girl automatically offer her father a bite of her meal, saw him refuse with a shake of his head and a gentle nudge toward her plate. He was giving her everything. The whole dinner, the experience, the special birthday memory, all for his daughter, with nothing kept back for himself. This is really good, Mila announced, sauce on her chin. I think Mama would like it. Caleb's smile went sad around the edges. I think she would too, baby. Do you remember her restaurant stories? Eleanor asked gently, sensing that the memory brought comfort rather than pain. Mila nodded enthusiastically, swallowing her food before speaking. Mama worked at a big building downtown, and she would walk past here every day and look at the menu in the window. She said someday we'd all get dressed up and come here as a family, and she'd order the tiramisu, and we'd see what all the fuss was about. It's very good tiramisu, Eleanor said. I've been here before. We'll make sure you get to try it. We. The word came from Caleb, quiet but pointed. Eleanor realized her mistake. She'd inserted herself into their celebration without invitation, had assumed a place in their evening that wasn't hers to claim. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume. No, it's... Caleb set down his fork, his expression softening. You've been incredibly kind. More than kind. I just don't want you to feel obligated to stay if you have somewhere else to be. I don't. Eleanor heard the honesty in her own voice, the admission of loneliness that she hadn't meant to reveal. I really don't have anywhere else to be. My Friday night plans involved going home to an empty apartment and answering work emails. This is better. Something shifted in Caleb's face. Recognition, maybe. The understanding of someone who knew about empty apartments and quiet Friday nights, who understood that loneliness wasn't always about being alone. Then we're glad you're here, he said simply. Mila beamed. Yeah, this is the best birthday. I gotta be late to a fancy restaurant and meet someone new and have chicken and everything. Eleanor laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its lightness. Getting to be late is definitely a birthday bonus. It was an accident, Caleb said, but he was smiling too. There was actually an accident on the Aurora Bridge. Traffic was backed up for miles. I tried calling, but my phone battery died, and by the time we got here, I thought... He trailed off, shaking his head. I thought we'd missed our chance. But we didn't. Mila bounced slightly in her seat, because Miss Eleanor had an extra chair. Just Eleanor, Eleanor corrected gently. And no, you didn't miss your chance. Sometimes things work out. She believed that in business, that timing and opportunity often aligned in unexpected ways, that deals fell through to make room for better deals, that setbacks led to breakthroughs. But in her personal life, Eleanor had stopped believing in working out. She'd started believing in strategic planning and careful control and protecting yourself from disappointment by never expecting too much. Sitting here with a single father and his 8-year-old daughter, eating dinner at a table meant for a date who never showed, Eleanor felt something shift. Not hope, exactly. More like possibility. The The sense that maybe the universe was less predictable than she'd convinced herself it was. They talked through dinner about easy things: Mila's school, her favorite subjects, reading and art, her least favorite, math, because fractions don't make sense. Caleb shared stories about his work, about the elderly woman who'd brought in her husband's vintage Mustang and cried when Caleb got it running again, about the teenager he was mentoring who showed real talent for engine work. Eleanor contributed her own stories, carefully edited. She talked about her grandmother, about growing up in Seattle, about loving architecture and old buildings. All true, all incomplete. "Do you have kids?" Mila asked during a lull in the conversation. "Mila," Caleb warned. "That's personal." "It's okay," Eleanor shook her head. "No, I don't have children. My work keeps me very busy." "That's sad," Mila said with the blunt honesty of children. "Kids are fun. You'd be good at it." "Mila," Caleb started again. "Why do you think that?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Mila considered this with the same seriousness she'd applied to her chicken parmesan. "Because you talk to me like I'm a real person, not like some grown-ups who use baby voices or pat my head like I'm a dog." Eleanor bit back a smile. "I hate when people do that too. Being small doesn't mean being stupid." "Exactly," Mila gestured with her fork for emphasis. "That's exactly what I tell Daddy." "And I always agree with you," Caleb said, affection clear in his voice. He glanced at Eleanor. "Mila's always been this way. Sarah used to say she was born 35 and was aging backward into childhood." "I can relate," Eleanor admitted. "I was the same way. Drove my teachers crazy." "Miss Nelson gets annoyed with me sometimes," Mila confessed. "She says I ask too many questions." "There's no such thing as too many questions," Eleanor said firmly. "Questions are how you learn. Anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." Caleb was looking at her again with that searching expression, like he was trying to reconcile who she appeared to be with who she might actually be. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch or look away. For once, she wasn't hiding behind professional composure or strategic distance. She was just here, at this table, sharing dinner with people who knew nothing about Eleanor Wright Holdings or Forbes covers or billion-dollar deals. She was just Eleanor. Antonio appeared to clear their plates and present dessert menus with a flourish. "And of course," he said, "for the birthday girl, tiramisu is complimentary. House policy." Mila's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" Antonio winked. "But I'll need to see some ID to verify the birthday." Caleb pulled out his wallet and produced what looked like a school ID card with Mila's picture. Antonio studied it with exaggerated seriousness, then nodded. 8 years old as of today. This checks out. 1 tiramisu coming up. As he walked away, Eleanor saw Caleb pull out cash from his wallet and count it quietly, his expression tight. She could practically see the mental math. Dinner, tip, maybe enough but not comfortable. Certainly not enough to add dessert for himself and Eleanor. She made a decision. "Antonio?" She called their waiter back. "Could you bring 3 forks with the tiramisu? We'll share." "No," Caleb said immediately. "Eleanor, you've already—" "It's Mila's birthday," Eleanor interrupted gently. "The birthday girl shouldn't eat cake alone. Besides, I have a weakness for mascarpone, and sharing means I can't eat too much and regret it later." The logic was sound enough that Caleb couldn't argue without making a scene. He nodded reluctantly, but Eleanor saw gratitude in his eyes mixed with something that might have been shame. She hated that she'd put it there, hated the complicated mathematics of pride and charity that made simple kindness so difficult to navigate. The tiramisu arrived on a single plate with 3 forks, exactly as requested. It was beautiful. Layers of espresso-soaked ladyfingers and sweet cream dusted with cocoa powder, garnished with a single chocolate curl. A small candle burned in the center. "Make a wish," Caleb told his daughter softly. Mila closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. Eleanor watched her and felt something twist in her chest, yearning for something she'd never known she wanted, for this kind of simple joy, for belonging to something small and genuine instead of something vast and isolating. The candle went out with a single breath. Mila opened her eyes, grinning. "I wished, but I can't tell you, or it won't come true." Smart, Eleanor said. The best wishes are kept secret. They ate the tiramisu slowly, savoring it, making it last. Mila declared it the best thing I've ever tasted after her first bite. Caleb closed his eyes when he tried it, like he was committing the flavor to memory. Eleanor just watched them both, feeling like an anthropologist observing a culture she'd never been part of. This easy affection, this celebration of small moments, this ability to be present and grateful despite everything they'd lost. She envied them. God help her, she envied this single father struggling to pay for dinner and his 8-year-old daughter who'd lost her mother. They had something Eleanor's billions couldn't buy. They had each other. They had love that wasn't complicated by contracts or calculations. They had authenticity. When the tiramisu was gone and the check arrived, Eleanor moved faster than Caleb could. She handed Antonio her credit card, the one with just her first name and middle initial, the one that wouldn't immediately identify her, along with enough cash to cover what looked like Caleb's entire contribution. I've got this, she said, brooking no argument. Call it a birthday present for Mila. Eleanor, no, you've already done too much. Caleb's voice was strained, his pride clearly warring with gratitude. Please, let me at least contribute. You gave me something more valuable than money, Eleanor said quietly, meaning it. You let me be part of your daughter's birthday when I was sitting here alone feeling sorry for myself. You turned what should have been one of my worst nights into something I'll actually remember fondly. That's worth way more than dinner. The words hung between them, too honest, too revealing. Eleanor saw understanding dawn in Caleb's eyes. The recognition that she wasn't just being generous, that she'd been genuinely lonely, that this evening had meant something to her too. Okay, he said finally, but next time, I'm buying. Next time. The words were casual, throwaway, probably didn't mean anything, but Eleanor felt them land with unexpected weight, with the suggestion of continuity, of this not being a single strange encounter, but the beginning of something. Deal, she heard herself say. They left together, walking out into the September night. The air had cooled, carrying the salt smell of Elliott Bay and the distant sound of ferry horns. Marcello's was in a neighborhood Eleanor owned, 3 buildings within 2 blocks. But standing here on the sidewalk, she felt like a tourist in her own city. Can we walk you somewhere? Caleb asked. Your car, or... I'm actually parked a few blocks away, Eleanor lied. Her car and driver were waiting in a garage beneath one of her buildings, but admitting that would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. I'm fine walking. At least let us walk with you until we find a cab, Caleb insisted. It's getting late. Mila was holding both their hands now, swinging between them like a bridge, humming something under her breath that might have been a Taylor Swift song. Eleanor let herself be pulled along, this strange little unit of 3 walking through Seattle's nighttime streets. They found a cab on 3rd Avenue. Caleb opened the door for his daughter, then turned back to Eleanor. For a moment, they just stood there, 2 strangers who'd shared something unexpectedly meaningful, trying to figure out how to say goodbye. Thank you, Caleb said. Really, I don't know how to thank you properly for tonight. You already did, Eleanor said. She crouched down one more time to Mila's level. Happy birthday, Mila. I hope 8 is everything you want it to be. Thank you for sharing your table, Mila said solemnly. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, including herself, she threw her arms around Eleanor's neck in a tight hug. Eleanor froze for half a second, then carefully hugged her back, feeling the small, solid warmth of this child who'd somehow decided Eleanor was worth affection. When Mila pulled back, Eleanor's eyes were stinging with tears she absolutely would not let fall. Good night, she managed. She watched the cab pull away, watched it disappear into Seattle's Friday night traffic, watched until she couldn't see Mila's face pressed against the back window anymore. Then she stood on the sidewalk alone, the emptiness returning like a tide, and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 texts from Rebecca asking if she was okay, 1 voicemail from her attorney about a contract dispute. Eleanor Wright, CEO, billion-dollar real estate mogul, was needed. But just Eleanor, the woman who'd shared tiramisu with a single father and his daughter, wanted to stand on this corner and pretend for just a few more minutes that she was someone else. Someone whose empty chair could be filled by chance and kindness. Someone who belonged to small moments instead of quarterly earnings reports. Someone who could have what she'd witnessed tonight, authentic connection, uncontaminated by money or power or carefully constructed lies. She opened her phone and started to type a text to Rebecca. Dinner was canceled. I'm fine. See you Monday. Then she deleted it and wrote instead, dinner was perfect. I'm fine. See you Monday. Because it had been perfect, in a way that had nothing to do with the man who'd stood her up and everything to do with the two people who'd appeared in his place. Eleanor walked to her car, thinking about empty chairs and second chances, about the strange way the universe seemed to rearrange itself when you least expected it. She thought about Caleb's calloused hands and steady voice, about Mila's solemn dark eyes and fierce intelligence, about belonging to something small and real. She thought about next time and told herself it didn't mean anything. But a small part of her, the part that had been just Eleanor tonight instead of Eleanor Wright, hoped desperately that it did. The phone call came on Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the dinner at Marcello's. Eleanor was in her office on the 42nd floor, reviewing acquisition proposals for a property portfolio in Portland, when her personal cell phone buzzed with an unknown local number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were usually journalists or people who'd somehow gotten past her assistant's screening, but something made her pick up. Hello? Hi, this is Caleb. Brooks? From Friday night? His voice was uncertain, like he half expected her not to remember. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the restaurant. Antonio said you'd left it in case we needed to reach you about something you'd left behind, which I know you didn't, but I asked anyway because I wanted to say thank you properly, and I'm rambling, sorry. Eleanor felt a smile spread across her face, genuine and unbidden. She swiveled her chair away from the panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, from the buildings she owned that stretched across the city like monuments to her success. It's more than okay. How's Mila? Did she have a good birthday? She hasn't stopped talking about it. Caleb's voice warmed with affection. She told everyone at school about the fancy restaurant and the tiramisu and the nice lady who shared her table. Her teacher called it an excellent exercise in descriptive narrative, which I think means Mila wrote about 3 pages when the assignment was 1. She's a good writer then. She's a good everything. Pride filled every syllable. But I'm not calling to brag about my kid. I'm calling because I owe you a proper thank you, and next time I'm buying seems like a lousy way to actually express gratitude when I ambushed you at a restaurant. You didn't ambush me, you rescued me from a very depressing evening of self-pity. Still, Caleb paused, and Eleanor could almost hear him gathering courage. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to get coffee this week? Nothing fancy, just, I don't know, a normal thank you between normal people? Normal people. The phrase caught Eleanor off guard. When was the last time someone had called her normal? When was the last time she'd felt normal? I'd like that, she said, and meant it completely. They met Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. Eleanor arrived first, wearing jeans and a plain sweater, her hair in a ponytail, looking as un-CEO-like as she could manage. She'd told Rebecca she was taking a personal afternoon and to reschedule her 3 o'clock with the construction team. Rebecca had stared at her like she'd announced she was joining the circus. Caleb walked in 10 minutes late, still in his work uniform, navy coveralls with Davidson's Auto Repair embroidered on the chest, his hands scrubbed clean, but with motor oil still visible under his fingernails. He spotted Eleanor and his face broke into a relieved smile. Sorry I'm late. We had an emergency brake job that ran over. It's fine. I just got here myself. Another small lie in service of maintaining the fiction that she was just Eleanor, that her time wasn't meticulously scheduled in 15-minute increments by an assistant who treated her calendar like a military operation. They ordered drip coffee for both of them, simple and unpretentious, and found a table by the window. The afternoon light slanted through the glass, illuminating dust motes and the faint steam rising from their cups. So, Caleb said, wrapping his hands around his coffee, I've been thinking about Friday night. Me too. Eleanor surprised herself with the admission. It was strange, right? The timing of everything? Caleb's dark eyes studied her face. If traffic hadn't been backed up, If my phone hadn't died, if we'd been even 5 minutes earlier or later, we never would have met. Mila says it was fate. What do you say? I say I'm grateful, whatever it was. He took a sip of coffee, then set it down carefully. I'm not usually the kind of person who talks to strangers. Neither is Mila, honestly. But there was something about you that felt safe, like we could trust you. Eleanor felt that admission like a weight settling on her chest. Trust. They'd trusted her based on a single act of kindness, and she'd immediately started lying to them about who she was. I'm glad you felt that way, she managed. Mila asked me this morning if we were going to see you again. Caleb smiled, but there was something tentative in it. She's gotten attached, which is rare for her. Most people don't know how to talk to her. They treat her like she's younger than she is, or they talk over her head like she's not there. But you talk to her like she mattered. She does matter. I know, but not everyone sees it. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his expression turning thoughtful. After Sarah died, people were sympathetic but weird. They'd ask how I was doing, then look uncomfortable when I actually answered honestly. Or they'd tell me everything happens for a reason, like there's some cosmic explanation for why an 8-year-old girl should lose her mother to cancer. I hate that phrase, Eleanor said quietly. Everything happens for a reason. Like tragedy is just a puzzle piece in some grand design instead of genuine loss. Exactly. Caleb's voice was fierce with agreement. Thank you. No one else seems to get that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt companionable rather than awkward. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with afternoon activity. Students bent over laptops, a group of elderly women playing cards, a young mother trying to keep her toddler from climbing the furniture. Tell me about Sarah, Eleanor said gently. If you want to talk about her. Caleb's expression shifted, grief and love mixing into something complex. She was a paralegal downtown. Smart, organized, had this laugh that made everyone around her start laughing too. We met in college. She was pre-law. I was studying mechanical engineering before I dropped out to help my dad when he got sick. He traced the rim of his coffee cup with one finger. We got married young, 22. Everyone said we were too young, but we knew. Sometimes you just know. Eleanor thought about her own romantic history, the careful dates with appropriate men from appropriate backgrounds, the relationships that made sense on paper but felt hollow in practice, the calculated approach to something that was supposed to be spontaneous. She'd never just known anything except how to build a company. She sounds wonderful, Eleanor said. She was. Caleb's voice was steady. The cancer was aggressive, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She fought hard, but some battles you can't win. He looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes. I'm not telling you this to make you sad. I'm telling you because I want you to understand why Friday night mattered. Mila hasn't celebrated her birthday properly since Sarah died. I've tried, but everything felt wrong. Too big or too small, too sad or too forced. But Friday, sharing your table, eating tiramisu that her mom promised her, that felt right. That felt like we were honoring Sarah while also moving forward. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'm honored to have been part of that. You were more than part of it. You made it happen. Caleb reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching. So thank you, properly, sincerely. Thank you for seeing two desperate people at a restaurant and choosing kindness. You don't need to keep thanking me, Eleanor said softly. But you're welcome. They talked for 2 hours, long after their coffee went cold. Caleb told stories about his work at the repair shop, about the elderly owner who treated him like a son, about the satisfaction of diagnosing problems and fixing them. Eleanor shared carefully edited stories about her work, about dealing with difficult clients and property inspections, about loving the puzzle of making spaces work for the people who use them. All true, all incomplete. Do you like Seattle? Eleanor asked at one point. Have you always lived here? Born and raised in Ballard, Caleb said. My dad was a fisherman before his back gave out. My mom works at the library. Very working class, salt of the earth kind of upbringing. Sarah was from California originally. Her family moved here when she was in high school. He smiled. She used to joke that she traded sunshine for coffee and rain and somehow came out ahead. What about you? Do you think she came out ahead? I'm biased, but yes. Caleb's expression turned serious. I know Seattle has its problems. Cost of living is insane. Traffic gets worse every year. All the tech money is pushing out regular people. But it's home. Mila's school is here. My job is here. Sarah's buried here. We're staying. Eleanor heard the defensiveness in his voice, the preemptive argument against an accusation she hadn't made. I wasn't suggesting you should leave. Sorry, I've had a few people suggest that I should move somewhere cheaper, somewhere easier for a single parent, like I should uproot Mila from everything she knows because rent is high. His jaw tightened. We're managing. We're fine. They weren't fine. Eleanor could read the signs in his secondhand phone, his work uniform that had been patched at the elbow, the way he'd counted cash at the restaurant. But fine was relative. Fine meant surviving. Fine meant keeping your daughter fed and clothed and in a good school despite everything the universe threw at you. Eleanor understood fine. She'd grown up fine after her mother died, in a big house with every material advantage but feeling fundamentally alone. Money didn't fix grief or fill emptiness. I think you're doing an amazing job, she said honestly. Mila is smart and kind and confident. That doesn't happen by accident. Caleb's expression softened. Thank you. That means a lot. A notification buzzed on Eleanor's phone. Rebecca with a reminder about tomorrow's board meeting. She silenced it without looking, but Caleb had already noticed. You need to get back to work, he said, starting to gather his things. No, Eleanor stopped herself. She did need to get back. She had contracts to review, calls to return, a dozen decisions waiting for her attention. But she didn't want this afternoon to end. Actually, yes, but I've really enjoyed this. Me too. Caleb stood and Eleanor followed. They walked outside together, back into Seattle's gray afternoon. Would you want to do this again? Maybe meet up this weekend? Mila's been asking if you'd like to go to the park with us on Saturday. She's been asking? Eleanor couldn't keep the pleasure out of her voice. Non-stop. Caleb smiled, a little embarrassed. She thinks you're cool. She told me you're the first grown-up she's met who doesn't talk down to her. High praise from an 8-year-old. I'd love to. Eleanor pulled out her phone, her personal phone, not the one Rebecca controlled. What's your number? I'll text you so you have mine. They exchanged numbers, and Eleanor felt absurdly like a teenager again, giddy over a boy's attention. Except Caleb wasn't a boy. He was a man who'd lived through tragedy and come out the other side still capable of kindness, still devoted to his daughter, still showing up every day to do the quiet, important work that kept the world running. Saturday, then, Caleb said. There's a playground near our apartment that Mila loves. It has these swings that go really high. Text me the address. Eleanor hesitated, then added, And Caleb, thank you for calling. I'm really glad you did. Me too. His smile was warm and genuine. See you Saturday, Eleanor. She watched him walk away, back toward the bus stop, and felt something unfurl in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. The sense that something was beginning that might actually matter. Her work phone buzzed again. Marcus this time, asking about the Portland acquisition. Eleanor looked at the screen, then at Caleb's retreating figure, and made a choice. She called Marcus back. Move the Portland deal to next week. I need time to review the environmental reports more carefully. But the deadline is flexible. I'll call them myself and extend it. Eleanor's voice carried the authority of someone who didn't expect to be questioned. I need this weekend clear. You never take weekends off, Marcus said, confusion evident. I'm taking this one. Eleanor ended the call before he could argue. Saturday morning arrived bright and unseasonably warm. One of those September days when Seattle remembered it was capable of sunshine. Eleanor stood in front of her closet, a walk-in space larger than some apartments, and tried to figure out what a normal person wore to a park. Not the designer jeans that cost $800, not the cashmere sweater that was soft as a cloud but screamed money. Not anything that would make Caleb look at her and realize she'd been lying about who she was. She settled on old jeans she'd had since college, a plain t-shirt, and sneakers that had actually been worn for running. She pulled her hair back in a ponytail and skipped makeup except for sunscreen. In the mirror, she looked younger, less polished, more like just Eleanor and less like Eleanor Wright, CEO. The playground was in a neighborhood Eleanor owned but had never actually visited, a collection of apartments and small houses where rent was still almost affordable, where families could live without needing two six-figure incomes. The park itself was modest but well-maintained, with new playground equipment and benches that didn't have broken slats. Eleanor had approved the budget for those upgrades 3 years ago. She'd never imagined she'd see them in person. Caleb and Mila were already there, Mila on a swing pumping her legs to gain height. She spotted Eleanor and waved frantically, her whole face lighting up. "Eleanor, you came!" "Of course I came." Eleanor walked over feeling absurdly nervous. "I promised, didn't I?" "People don't always keep promises," Mila said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Chen at school says we should learn to manage expectations." "Mrs. Chen sounds realistic but pessimistic." Eleanor glanced at Caleb, who was leaning against the swing set, watching his daughter with undisguised affection. "I try to keep my promises." "Then you're better than most people." Mila jumped off the swing mid-arc, landing with a stumble that made Caleb start forward in alarm. But she caught herself and grinned. "Can you push me?" "Daddy pushes good, but you look like you might push better." "I don't know about better," Eleanor said, taking position behind the swing as Mila climbed back on. "But I'll do my best." She pushed, and Mila shrieked with delight, demanding higher, higher, until Eleanor was putting genuine effort into each push, and Caleb was laughing at both of them. "Careful," he called out. "She'll have you pushing for an hour if you let her." "I've got good stamina," Eleanor called back, then immediately regretted the phrasing. But Caleb just smiled, and after a few more minutes, Mila announced she wanted to try the monkey bars instead. She ran off across the playground, leaving Eleanor and Caleb standing together in the morning sun. "Thank you for coming," Caleb said. "She's been talking about this all week." "I've been looking forward to it too." Eleanor watched Mila navigate the monkey bars with determined concentration. "She's fearless." "She gets that from Sarah." Caleb's voice was soft. "I'm the cautious one. Sarah used to say I worried enough for both of us so she could be brave." "That sounds like a good partnership." "It was." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "It's strange, introducing someone new into our life. It hasn't happened since Sarah died. I've been protective of our little unit, you know? Didn't want people getting close who might disappoint Mila or leave or..." He stopped himself. "Sorry, that's probably too much honesty." "It's not." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "You're protecting your daughter. That's not too much anything. That's being a good father." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, gratitude mixed with relief. "Thank you for understanding." They spent the next 2 hours at the playground, taking turns pushing Mila on the swings, spotting her on the climbing structure, sitting on the benches while she made friends with other kids, and organized an elaborate game that seemed to involve rescuing stuffed animals from an invisible dragon. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she'd spent 2 hours doing nothing productive, nothing that advanced her business or her carefully constructed life. She checked her phone twice, once when Rebecca called about an urgent contract issue that turned out to not be urgent at all, and once when Marcus texted about the Portland deal. Both times she answered quickly and put the phone away, choosing presence over productivity. It felt revolutionary. Around noon, Mila announced she was hungry in that way where I might die if I don't eat soon, which Caleb translated as, "She's being dramatic, but she should probably eat." "There's a food truck nearby that makes good tacos," Eleanor suggested. "If you're interested?" Caleb hesitated. That same hesitation Eleanor was learning to recognize, the mental calculation of cost versus pride. She jumped in before he could decline. "My treat. Considerate payment for including me in your Saturday." "You don't need to pay for inclusion," Caleb said firmly. "You're here because we want you here, not because you bought your way in." The word stung, probably more than he intended. Eleanor had spent so much of her life in spaces where money was the price of admission, where her presence was valued because of what she could provide or invest or acquire. Being wanted just for herself felt foreign and fragile. "I know," she said quietly. I want to contribute. Let me buy lunch, please." Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm buying next time." Next time. There was that phrase again, casual and weighted, suggesting continuity and future and the possibility of this becoming routine. The food truck, a converted Airstream with hand-painted murals, was parked 2 blocks away. They ordered tacos and sat on a picnic table in the small park beside it, eating with the kind of unself-conscious enjoyment that came from genuine hunger and good food. "These are amazing," Mila declared, sauce on her chin. "Better than school lunch." "Everything's better than school lunch," Caleb said. "That's not a high bar." "The pizza isn't terrible," Mila argued, "and Taco Tuesday is usually okay." Eleanor listened to them debate the relative merits of cafeteria food and felt that same twist of yearning she'd experienced at Marcello's. This easy banter, this comfortable knowledge of each other's rhythms and preferences. This was family. This was what she'd missed growing up in a house that was large and lonely, where dinner was formal and quiet, and her father was always working. "What about you?" Mila asked suddenly, turning to Eleanor. "Do you have family here?" The question was innocent, but it landed hard. "My father lives in Seattle," Eleanor said carefully. "But we're not close. He's very focused on his work." "What does he do?" "He's in business, corporate finance." All true. Her father was the CFO of a major investment firm, had been for 30 years. He'd also been largely absent from Eleanor's childhood, too busy building his career to notice his daughter was building hers. "That sounds boring," Mila said with the blunt honesty of 8-year-olds. "Mila," Caleb warned, but Eleanor laughed. "It is boring, very boring. Lots of numbers and spreadsheets and meetings." "Is your mom here too?" "Mila, that's enough questions," Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. "Some things are private." "It's okay." Eleanor met his eyes, seeing concern there. "My mom died when I was 12, car accident, very sudden." Mila's expression transformed into immediate sympathy. "Like my mom, but different." "Yes, like your mom, but different." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry you understand what that's like." "It's okay. It's sad, but it's okay." Mila reached across the table and patted Eleanor's hand with grave seriousness. "At least we have other people now. You have your dad, even if he's boring, and I have Daddy, and now we both have each other." The simple logic, the inclusion of Eleanor in Mila's definition of each other, made Eleanor's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back rapidly. "You're right," she managed. "We do have each other." Caleb was watching her with an expression that mixed surprise and something deeper, something that looked like recognition. Like he was seeing past her careful composure to the lonely child underneath, who'd never quite healed from losing her mother. They finished lunch and walked slowly back toward the playground, Mila running ahead to pick dandelions that she wove into an increasingly bedraggled bouquet. The afternoon sun was warm on Eleanor's shoulders, and the neighborhood felt alive in a way her usual world didn't. Kids playing basketball in driveways, families gardening in small yards, the sound of music drifting from open windows. This was the Seattle she owned but never experienced. The Seattle where normal people lived normal lives, where billions didn't insulate you from grass stains and dandelion bouquets and tacos from food trucks. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said when Mila was far enough ahead to not hear. "Of course." "Why are you spending your Saturday with us?" His voice was curious, not accusatory. "I mean, I'm glad you are, but you seem like someone who has a lot of options, a lot of places you could be." Eleanor considered lying, deflecting, giving some easy answer about enjoying their company, but there was something about Caleb's honesty that demanded reciprocation. "Because this is the first time in years that I've felt like myself," she said quietly. "Not the person I'm supposed to be or the image I'm supposed to project, just me. And I like who I am when I'm with you and Mila." Caleb stopped walking. That's a heavy thing to say on a second not-quite date. "Is this a date?" Eleanor's heart was suddenly pounding. "I don't know. Is it?" They stood facing each other in the middle of the sidewalk, the question hanging between them. Eleanor could see uncertainty in Caleb's face, vulnerability that probably cost him to show. A single father with a young daughter didn't date casually. Every relationship was high stakes when a child's heart was involved. "I'd like it to be," Eleanor said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "If you want that too." "I do." Caleb's voice was rough. "But I need you to understand. Mila comes first. Always. If this goes somewhere and then ends badly, it's not just me who gets hurt. So I need to know you're serious about this, about us. I'm serious. Eleanor meant it completely, even as guilt twisted in her stomach. She was serious, but she was also lying to him about something fundamental. I promise, I'm serious. Okay. Caleb smiled, relieved and nervous. Okay. Then, yes, this is a date. Our second one, technically, if coffee counts as the first. Coffee counts, Eleanor said firmly. Mila came running back with her dandelion bouquet, now augmented with several leaves and what might have been a small stick. This is for you, she announced, presenting it to Eleanor with ceremony. Because you're nice and you pushed me high on the swings, and you said my questions weren't annoying. Thank you. Eleanor accepted the bouquet like it was a dozen roses. This is beautiful. I'll keep it somewhere special. Promise? Mila's eyes were serious. Promise. They walked back to the playground together, and Eleanor felt the afternoon shift into something precious and fragile. She was on a date, her first real date in months, maybe years if she was honest about it. And it was with a man who saw just Eleanor, who knew nothing about Eleanor Wright Holdings or Forbes covers or the billions that should have insulated her from loneliness, but somehow hadn't. She should tell him the truth. She knew that. Every minute that passed made the deception worse, made the eventual revelation more damaging. But standing here in the warm September sun, holding a bouquet of dandelions while Mila ran ahead and Caleb walked beside her with that new awareness in his eyes, Eleanor couldn't bring herself to break the spell. Not yet. Not when she was finally feeling like herself for the first time in years. Just a little longer, she told herself. Just until this fragile thing between them was strong enough to survive the truth. It was a rationalization. She knew that even as she made it. But she let herself believe it anyway, tucking the guilt away alongside all the other things she'd learned to compartmentalize in service of building her empire. The afternoon stretched into evening. They played more, walked to get ice cream, sat on the grass while Mila read from a book she'd brought, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the same one she'd mentioned at dinner. She read with expression and confidence, occasionally stopping to explain plot points Eleanor already knew but pretended to find fascinating. Lucy's brave, Mila said at one point. She goes into Narnia even though it's scary because she wants to know what happens next. That is brave, Eleanor agreed. Sometimes the scariest thing is not knowing. Daddy says knowing can be scary too. He says sometimes you have to be brave even when you know things might go wrong. Caleb shot Eleanor a look that said he knew exactly what his daughter was doing, drawing parallels, making connections, trying to understand the adult world through the lens of her stories. Your daddy's right, Eleanor said. Both kinds of brave matter. The sun was setting by the time they finally left the park, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible but were somehow real. They walked slowly back toward the bus stop where Caleb and Mila would catch their ride home. Thank you for today, Caleb said when they reached the corner. This was really nice. It was. Eleanor didn't want it to end. Can we do it again? Soon? Yes. No hesitation this time, just certainty. Definitely yes. Mila hugged Eleanor goodbye, a long, tight hug that squeezed Eleanor's heart. Will you come to my soccer game next week? I'm not very good, but Daddy says trying counts. I'd love to come. Eleanor looked at Caleb for confirmation. Saturday at 10, he said. Washington Park. If you're sure you want to watch a bunch of 8-year-olds chase a ball around a field with varying levels of coordination. I'm sure. Their bus arrived and Eleanor watched them board, watched Mila press her face against the window and wave until the bus turned the corner and disappeared. Then she stood alone on the sidewalk, holding a bouquet of wilting dandelions, and felt the weight of her double life settle back onto her shoulders. Her work phone had 17 missed calls. Her personal phone had 6 texts from Rebecca, each progressively more urgent. The world she'd escaped for a day was calling her back, demanding attention, requiring Eleanor Wright instead of just Eleanor. She walked to where her driver had been waiting discreetly 3 blocks away, far enough that Caleb and Mila wouldn't see the Mercedes, or wonder why someone who worked in property management had a driver. She climbed into the back seat and finally checked her messages. Marcus. Portland deal falling apart. Need you ASAP. Rebecca. Board meeting moved to Sunday. Mandatory attendance. Her father. Heard you missed a meeting Friday. This is becoming concerning. Eleanor closed her eyes and leaned back against the leather seat. In her hand, the dandelion bouquet was already losing its flowers, petals dropping onto her jeans. She should throw it away. It was dying. It was trash. It was the kind of thing that had no place in her carefully controlled life. Instead, she held it carefully all the way home. And when she got to her penthouse apartment, 3,000 square feet of steel and glass overlooking Elliott Bay, she put the dandelions in water in a crystal vase that cost more than Caleb probably made in a week. They looked ridiculous there, wilting weeds in a vessel meant for hothouse orchids. But Eleanor kept them anyway, a reminder of an afternoon when she'd been just Eleanor, when she'd been chosen for herself rather than her bank account, when she'd felt more real than she had in years. The guilt would come later. The reckoning would come later. The moment when she'd have to choose between protecting her deception and protecting this fragile new thing she was building with Caleb and Mila. That would come later. For now, she had wilting dandelions in crystal and the memory of a little girl's hug and a man's hand almost touching hers over coffee. For now, she had hope. She just hoped it would be enough when everything inevitably fell apart. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and terrifying. Eleanor went to Mila's soccer game and cheered from the sidelines as 8-year-olds swarmed the ball in enthusiastic chaos. She met Caleb for coffee twice more during his lunch breaks, learning to read the grease under his fingernails like a map of his morning. Brake jobs left dark smudges. Oil changes were lighter. Transmission work left his hands stained for days. She showed up at the playground on Saturday afternoons and pushed Mila on swings until her arms ached, then sat with Caleb on park benches talking about everything and nothing while his daughter played. She kept lying. Every time Caleb asked about her work, Eleanor offered carefully constructed half-truths. Yes, she worked long hours. No, she couldn't always control her schedule. Yes, her job was demanding. No, she didn't want to talk about it much. Work was work, and this time with them felt like escape. That last part was true. Being with Caleb and Mila did feel like escape, like stepping into an alternate version of her life where she was allowed to be small and ordinary and simply present, where success was measured in Mila's laughter instead of quarterly earnings, and Caleb's smile instead of acquisition portfolios. But the guilt grew heavier with each passing day. 3 weeks after the soccer game, Eleanor sat in her office reviewing contracts for a major downtown development when Rebecca knocked on her door with unusual hesitancy. "There's a journalist here to see you from Seattle Business Journal. She says she has an appointment." Eleanor checked her calendar and cursed internally. She'd forgotten about this interview entirely, too distracted by thoughts of the dinner she was supposed to have with Caleb and Mila that evening. Their first real dinner together since Marcello's at Caleb's apartment, a milestone that felt weighted with significance. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." The interview lasted an hour and consisted of the usual questions about Eleanor Wright Holdings' expansion plans, her vision for sustainable development, her thoughts on Seattle's housing crisis. Eleanor answered on autopilot, giving practiced responses while her mind wandered to what she'd wear to dinner, whether she should bring wine or if that would seem presumptuous, how she'd navigate meeting Caleb in his space instead of neutral territory. "One last question," the journalist said as she gathered her things. "There's a rumor you're looking at residential development in the Aurora Avenue corridor. Any truth to that?" Eleanor's attention snapped back fully. Aurora Avenue, the neighborhood where Caleb and Mila lived, where rent was still almost affordable, where families could survive on working-class incomes. She'd been reviewing proposals for 3 months, weighing options for acquisition and renovation that would increase property values and, inevitably, displace current residents. "No comment on specific projects," Eleanor said smoothly. "But Eleanor Wright Holdings is always looking for opportunities to improve Seattle's housing stock while maintaining neighborhood character." The journalist smiled like she'd gotten exactly the non-answer she expected and left. Eleanor sat alone in her office afterward, staring at the Aurora Avenue file on her computer screen, feeling sick. She was going to Caleb's apartment tonight. She was going to sit at his table and eat his food and play with his daughter in a building she might buy and renovate and price him out of. She was going to continue lying while planning projects that could destroy the fragile stability he'd built. The ethical implications made her head spin. Eleanor closed her laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. She could pull out of the Aurora Avenue deal. She had that power. One word from her and the entire project would die, move to some other neighborhood where she wasn't personally invested in the residents. But that wasn't how she'd built her empire. She didn't make business decisions based on personal feelings. She made them based on market analysis and projected returns and strategic positioning. Mixing business and personal life was how you lost objectivity, how you made mistakes that cost millions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Still good for tonight?" Mila's been cooking since she got home from school. Well, helping cook. Mostly she's been taste testing. Eleanor stared at the message, at the casual intimacy of it, at the assumption that she'd show up because she'd promised to, that she was reliable, trustworthy. She texted back, "Absolutely. What should I bring? Just yourself. We've got everything covered." Eleanor put down her phone and made a decision. She'd go to dinner, she'd be present and honest in every way except the one way that mattered. And tomorrow she'd start figuring out how to tell Caleb the truth without destroying what they were building. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. The eternal refrain of people who knew they were making the wrong choice but couldn't bring themselves to stop. Caleb's apartment was on the third floor of a building that had probably been nice 40 years ago, but now showed its age in peeling paint and a front door that didn't quite close properly. Eleanor climbed stairs with worn carpeting and followed the sound of music and laughter to apartment 3C. She knocked and Mila answered immediately, grinning like Christmas morning. "You're here! Come in, come in! We made spaghetti and meatballs from scratch and I helped with the meatballs. And Daddy says they're probably the best meatballs ever made by anyone." "That's high praise," Eleanor said, stepping inside. The apartment was small, maybe 800 square feet, but immaculately clean and filled with evidence of life actually being lived. Mila's artwork covered the refrigerator. Books overflowed from a shelf in the living room. Photos lined the walls, mostly of Mila and Caleb, but some including a woman with dark hair and a warm smile who had to be Sarah. Eleanor felt like an intruder stepping into these memories, into this carefully preserved sanctuary of a family that had survived tragedy. "Eleanor, hi." Caleb emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the Cook," with a cartoon chef hat. He looked embarrassed. "This was a gift from Mila. I'm not trying to make a statement." "I think it's perfect." Eleanor smiled, something in her chest loosening at the sight of him so domestic, so comfortable in his own space. "Can I help with anything?" "You can help me set the table," Mila announced, already pulling Eleanor toward the small dining area. "We have special plates for when people visit. Daddy doesn't let me use them usually, but tonight's special." "Why is tonight special?" Eleanor asked, though she thought she knew. Mila looked at her like the answer was obvious. "Because you're here." They set the table together, Mila providing detailed instructions about where each fork and knife should go, explaining that she'd learned proper table setting from a YouTube video about fancy restaurants. Eleanor bit back a smile and followed directions, letting an 8-year-old teach her something she'd known since childhood. Dinner was chaotic and perfect. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked and the meatballs were unevenly sized, but everything tasted like effort and care and the desire to impress. Mila narrated most of the meal, telling stories about school, and her friend Emma, who had a pet hamster, and her teacher Mr. Harrison, who did funny voices when he read aloud. Caleb watched his daughter with undisguised affection, occasionally interjecting to correct wild exaggerations or redirect stories that were headed into inappropriate territory. He caught Eleanor's eye several times during the meal, and something passed between them: intimacy, understanding, the recognition of two people who were choosing to be here, to build something deliberate and fragile. After dinner, Mila insisted on showing Eleanor her room. It was tiny, barely big enough for a twin bed and a small desk, but every surface was covered with projects and books and half-finished crafts. "This is where I do my important work," Mila said seriously, gesturing at the desk where papers were stacked in haphazard piles. "I'm writing a book about a girl who discovers she's actually a princess, but she doesn't want to be because being a princess sounds boring." "That sounds like a good book," Eleanor said, picking up a page covered in Mila's careful handwriting. "Can I read some?" if you promise not to laugh at the spelling. Daddy says my spelling is creative." Eleanor read 3 pages of Mila's story, which was charming and surprisingly well-structured for an 8-year-old. The protagonist, also named Mila, unsurprisingly, kept running away from the castle to have adventures in the forest, much to her royal parents' dismay. "This is really good," Eleanor said honestly. "You have a gift for dialogue. The characters sound like real people." Mila beamed. "Really? You're not just saying that because Daddy's making you be nice?" "Really? I wouldn't lie about writing. It's too important." Something in Eleanor's chest twisted as she said it. She wouldn't lie about writing, but apparently she'd lie about everything else that mattered. They returned to the living room where Caleb was cleaning up the kitchen. Eleanor tried to help, but he waved her away, insisting she was a guest. So she sat on the worn couch with Mila, reading from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe until the little girl's eyes started drooping. "Bedtime," Caleb announced gently. "Say goodnight to Eleanor." "But we're at the good part," Mila protested, even as she yawned. "Peter just found out about the prophecy." "The good part will still be there tomorrow." Caleb ruffled her hair. "Go brush your teeth." Mila hugged Eleanor goodnight. These hugs were becoming routine, expected, precious, and disappeared into the bathroom. Caleb followed to supervise the bedtime routine, leaving Eleanor alone in the living room. She stood and walked to the photos on the wall, studying them more carefully now. Sarah had been beautiful, not in a conventional model way, but in the way of women who radiated warmth and intelligence. In every photo, she was laughing or mid-conversation, captured in moments of genuine joy. One photo showed Sarah and Caleb on their wedding day, young and earnest, and so clearly in love it made Eleanor's throat tight. Another showed Sarah pregnant, her hand on her belly, Caleb's hand covering hers. A third showed Sarah in a hospital bed holding newborn Mila, exhaustion and wonder mixed on her face. A life documented in snapshots, a love story with a tragic ending. A family that had been complete and was now learning to be whole despite the missing piece. "She would have liked you," Caleb said quietly from behind her. Eleanor turned. He was leaning against the wall, his expression soft and sad. "You think so?" "I know so." Sarah believed in kindness over everything else. She used to say the world had enough smart people and successful people, but it could always use more kind people. Caleb walked closer, standing beside Eleanor to look at the photos. "You're kind in ways that matter, in ways that count." Eleanor wanted to tell him she wasn't kind. She was calculating and strategic and building an empire that displaced people like him. She was lying to him every day, letting him believe she was someone she wasn't, protecting her deception because the truth would end this, and she wasn't ready for it to end. "I'm not as kind as you think," she said quietly. "Yes, you are." Caleb's voice was certain. "You gave up your table at a restaurant for strangers. You showed up to a kid's soccer game. You spend your Saturdays at playgrounds when you could be doing anything else. That's kindness, Eleanor. That's showing up for people because you care, not because you have to." The words landed like blows. He thought she was there out of pure kindness, out of care uncontaminated by guilt or selfishness, or the desperate need to be someone other than who she really was. He thought she was good. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." The words came out before Eleanor could stop them, driven by guilt and a sudden desperate need to be honest. "Okay?" He turned to face her fully, concern in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Eleanor opened her mouth, ready to confess everything, the company, the money, the lies that had compounded until they'd become the foundation of their entire relationship. But before she could speak, her phone rang. She almost ignored it, should have ignored it, but years of conditioning made her pull it out and glance at the screen. Rebecca, calling at 9 p.m. on a Friday, which meant emergency. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, the confession dying on her lips. "I have to take this. 1 second." She stepped into the kitchen for privacy. "What is it?" "We have a major problem." Rebecca's voice was tight with stress. "There's been a structural issue discovered at the Portland property. The inspection we thought was complete missed significant foundation damage. We need you there first thing tomorrow to meet with engineers and decide if we're pulling out of the deal entirely." Eleanor's mind raced through implications. Portland was a cornerstone of their expansion strategy. Pulling out would cost millions in sunk costs and damage their reputation with partners. But proceeding with foundation issues could cost more in the long run if the building was unsalvageable. How bad is bad? Bad enough that our engineers are recommending a full assessment before we proceed. They need you there to authorize the additional inspection costs and make final decisions about whether we're walking away. Can't Marcus handle this? Marcus is in Singapore closing the waterfront deal. You're the only one with authority to make this call. Rebecca paused. I'm sorry. I know you blocked off your weekend, but this can't wait. Eleanor looked through the kitchen doorway to where Caleb stood studying the photos of his late wife, probably wondering what Eleanor had been about to tell him. She thought about the Portland deal, about the millions at stake, about the employees whose jobs depended on these decisions being made correctly and quickly. She thought about the conversation she'd been about to have, the truth she'd been about to tell, the fragile trust she'd been about to either save or destroy. I'll be there tomorrow morning, she heard herself say. Book me on the first flight out. She ended the call and returned to the living room, already formulating the lie she'd have to tell. But Caleb spoke first. You have to go. It wasn't a question. He'd clearly overheard enough to understand. I'm so sorry. There's a work emergency, a property issue that can't wait. All technically true. I have to leave early tomorrow morning. Where? Caleb asked, and Eleanor realized she'd never told him about traveling for work, had never had to explain leaving Seattle. Portland. Just for the day. Maybe overnight. I should know more soon. She hated how easily the explanations came, how practiced she was at constructing believable lies. Caleb nodded slowly. That sounds serious. It's complicated. I'm really sorry. I was hoping to spend tomorrow with you and Mila. Work happens. I understand. But something had shifted in his expression, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. You should probably get going then, if you're flying out early. He was giving her an out, Eleanor realized, allowing her to leave before the conversation could continue, before whatever she'd been about to say could be spoken. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he sensed that truth would complicate what was currently simple. Caleb? She started. It's okay. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Really? We'll see you when you get back. Eleanor wanted to push, to finish the conversation, to force honesty into the space between them. But she didn't. She accepted the escape route he'd offered, gathered her things, and said goodbye with a promise to call when she knew her schedule. Mila was already asleep, so Eleanor left without saying goodbye to her. It felt symbolic somehow, leaving without proper closure, running away from difficult conversations toward the demands of a company that needed her more urgently than the people who wanted her. The drive back to her penthouse took 20 minutes through quiet Friday night streets. Eleanor sat in the back of the Mercedes and stared at her reflection in the window, seeing not just Eleanor, but Eleanor Wright, CEO, billionaire, woman who'd built an empire and couldn't figure out how to navigate one honest relationship. Her phone buzzed with details from Rebecca. Flight at 6 a.m., meetings scheduled from 9 to 5, hotel booked for overnight stay. The machine of her professional life clicking smoothly into place, absorbing her back into the role she'd been born to play. At home, Eleanor packed an overnight bag and reviewed files on her laptop until 2 a.m., preparing for tomorrow's decisions. The Portland property was salvageable with significant investment, or they could cut their losses and walk away. Either choice had implications that would ripple through the company for years. These were the decisions she was good at: strategic, calculated, based on data and projections and measurable outcomes. Clear problems with quantifiable solutions. Relationships weren't like that. Love wasn't like that. You couldn't run a cost-benefit analysis on whether to tell someone the truth. You couldn't project the return on investment of vulnerability. At 3 a.m., Eleanor finally admitted she wasn't going to sleep. She made coffee and stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows watching Seattle sleep below her, all those lives unfolding in the building she owned, behind windows she controlled. Somewhere out there, Caleb was sleeping in his small apartment with his daughter down the hall, believing Eleanor was exactly who she claimed to be, trusting her, building something with her based on a foundation of lies. Eleanor pulled out her phone and opened her text conversation with him. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to form words that would explain without destroying, confess without losing. Instead, she wrote, "Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you know." I'll call you from Portland. His reply came surprisingly fast for 3 a.m. Travel safe. Mila will want a full report when you're back. Not, I'll want a full report. Just Mila. Like he was already pulling back, protecting himself from whatever truth Eleanor had almost spoken. She texted back a simple heart emoji, the first one she'd ever sent him, then immediately regretted it. Too much, too fast, too presumptuous after running away from an important conversation. But Caleb sent one back. Eleanor stared at that tiny red heart until her eyes burned. Such a small thing, a simple digital symbol, but it felt like a promise and a threat. He was falling for her. Mila was falling for her. They were building something real based on fake foundations. And when the truth came out, not if, but when, because these things always came out eventually, the collapse would destroy everyone involved. The next morning, Eleanor boarded her flight to Portland with 45 minutes of sleep and too much coffee. The structural assessment took 6 hours, crawling through the Portland building with engineers who pointed out cracks in foundations and water damage in load-bearing walls and a dozen other problems that would cost millions to fix properly. My recommendation is walk away, the lead engineer said as they stood in what was supposed to be the main lobby. This building has good bones, but they're broken bones. You're looking at 18 months of repairs minimum, and that's if we don't find more problems when we start work. Eleanor surveyed the space with a professional eye, seeing past the damage to the potential. Prime location, good square footage, the kind of property that could be a centerpiece of their Portland expansion if they were willing to invest the time and money. What's the cost estimate for full renovation including foundation repair? The engineer consulted his tablet. 42 million, maybe more. Eleanor did the math instantly. 42 million plus the 18-month timeline meant they'd be underwater on this property for at least 3 years before seeing returns. But if they did it right, if they created something genuinely valuable instead of just profitable. We proceed, she said. Full renovation. I want this building to be a model for how we do sustainable development in urban cores. We're not flipping it fast, we're doing it right. The engineer looked surprised. That's a significant investment for uncertain returns. I'm aware. Draw up the plans. I'll review them Monday. She made the decision in 30 seconds, the same way she'd made every major decision in her career, quickly, confidently, trusting her instincts and her analysis. In business, Eleanor never second-guessed herself. It was only in her personal life that she doubted everything. The flight back to Seattle landed at 8 p.m. Saturday night. Eleanor went straight home, exhausted and wired, her mind still running calculations about Portland, while another part of her brain obsessively replayed last night's almost confession. She should call Caleb. She should finish what she'd started to say. She should tell him the truth before this went any further. Instead, she showered, ordered takeout she didn't eat, and fell asleep on her couch to a documentary about architecture she'd seen 3 times before. She woke at 3 a.m. to her phone ringing. Unknown number, which usually meant spam, but something made her answer. Eleanor? Caleb's voice was strained, urgent. I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else. Mila's running a fever. It spiked to 103 an hour ago, and I've given her medicine, but it's not coming down, and she's asking for you, and I don't know if that's appropriate to ask, but... What hospital? Eleanor was already moving, wide awake, adrenaline clearing the fog of exhaustion. I'm not... Should I take her to the hospital? It's just a fever. I don't want to overreact. Caleb. Eleanor made her voice calm, authoritative. 103 and a child that won't respond to medicine is hospital territory. Which one are you closest to? Swedish on Cherry Hill. Meet me there in 20 minutes. I'm leaving now. Eleanor, you don't have to... I'm already out the door. She wasn't. She was standing in her living room in pajamas. But she would be within 90 seconds. Eleanor threw on jeans and a sweater, called her driver with a terseness that communicated emergency, and was in the car within 5 minutes of hanging up with Caleb. The drive to Swedish took 15 minutes through empty 3 a.m. streets. Eleanor used the time to text her personal physician. One of the benefits of extreme wealth was having doctors who responded immediately, regardless of hour, to be on standby in case Mila needed specialist care. Caleb was standing in the emergency room entrance when Eleanor arrived. Mila wrapped in a blanket in his arms, the little girl's face flushed with fever. They both looked terrified. I've got you, Eleanor said, taking charge without thinking. Come on. She walked them through triage with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, providing medical history she'd gotten from Caleb in rapid-fire questions during the drive, ensuring Mila was seen quickly, despite the ER being crowded with Saturday night emergencies. A nurse took them back to a room within 10 minutes, faster than normal, and Eleanor suspected her physician had made calls and began checking Mila's vitals while asking questions about symptoms. It came on fast, Caleb explained, holding his daughter's hand. She was fine at dinner, said she felt tired at bedtime, then woke up burning hot around midnight. I gave her children's Tylenol, but the fever just kept climbing. The nurse noted everything, her expression professional but concerned. The doctor will be in shortly. They waited in the room together, Caleb sitting on the edge of Mila's bed while Eleanor stood near the wall, trying to stay out of the way but unable to leave. Mila drifted in and out of fevered sleep, occasionally opening her eyes to check that both adults were still there. You didn't have to come, Caleb said quietly after 10 minutes of silence. But I'm really glad you did. Where else would I be? Eleanor meant it completely. Home, asleep, living your life without getting dragged into our drama at 3 a.m. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Eleanor was learning meant stress. I shouldn't have called. It was selfish. But Mila kept asking if you were coming, and I wanted you here. I wanted to be here. Eleanor moved closer, standing beside the bed. You're not drama, Caleb. She stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence in a way that was honest but not terrifying. What? Caleb's dark eyes searched her face. What are we? Before Eleanor could answer, the door opened and a doctor entered, young, efficient, already reading from a tablet. Mila Brooks? I'm Dr. Patel. Let's see what's going on. The examination took 20 minutes. Dr. Patel checked ears, throat, lungs, abdomen, asked about recent exposures and symptoms. Mila answered questions in a small voice that made Eleanor's heart hurt. It looks like strep throat, Dr. Patel finally announced, which explains the sudden high fever. We'll do a rapid test to confirm, but I'm fairly certain. The good news is it's very treatable with antibiotics. The bad news is she'll feel pretty miserable for a few days. The relief on Caleb's face was immediate and overwhelming. So she's okay. It's nothing serious? Nothing serious. Strep is common and responds well to treatment. Start her on antibiotics tonight, keep her hydrated, and she should start feeling better within 24 hours. Dr. Patel smiled at Mila. You're going to be fine, kiddo, but no school for a few days. Mila managed a weak smile. No math test Monday? No math test Monday, the doctor confirmed. They left the hospital an hour later with prescriptions and instructions, and Mila falling asleep against her father's shoulder. Eleanor's driver had waited. She'd told him to, and she insisted on taking them home despite Caleb's protests about buses running even at 4 a.m. Please, she said quietly, let me do this one small thing. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, thank you. The drive to his apartment was silent except for Mila's soft breathing. Eleanor sat across from Caleb in the spacious back seat of her Mercedes, watching him hold his daughter with infinite care, and felt the gulf between them yawn wider. This car cost more than he probably made in 2 years. Her driver made more hourly than Caleb charged for an oil change. They were sitting in luxury that was normal to her but foreign to him, and she'd just revealed it casually because an emergency demanded she stop pretending. When they arrived at his building, Caleb looked at the car properly for the first time, seemed to really see it. This is your car? Company car, Eleanor lied reflexively. One of the perks of the job. Property management must pay better than I thought. His tone was light, but there was a question under it, an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. I should go, Eleanor said, not answering. Let you get Mila settled. Call me tomorrow and tell me how she's feeling. Eleanor. Caleb shifted Mila in his arms and looked at Eleanor with an intensity that made her breath catch. Whatever you were going to tell me Friday night, I think I need to hear it, soon. I know. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I promise. When Mila's better, we'll talk. He nodded slowly, then carried his daughter inside. Eleanor watched them disappear into the building, then sat back in the Mercedes and finally let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. She was in love with Caleb Brooks. She was in love with his daughter. And when they found out who she really was, the life she'd been hiding, the lies she'd been telling, they'd hate her for it. The reckoning was coming. Soon. And Eleanor had no idea how to survive it. The call came Tuesday morning while Eleanor was in a board meeting discussing fourth quarter projections. It wasn't Caleb's number. It was a different one, unfamiliar, and Eleanor almost declined it before something made her step out of the conference room to answer. Eleanor Wright? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Speaking. This is Principal Matthews from Whitman Elementary. I'm calling about Mila Brooks. You're listed as her emergency contact. Eleanor's blood went cold. What happened? Is she okay? She's fine physically, but there's been an incident. Her father was supposed to pick her up an hour ago and hasn't arrived. We've been trying his cell phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. Mila's getting anxious and she asked us to call you. Emergency contact. Eleanor had no memory of being listed as anyone's emergency contact, but then she remembered. Saturday at the hospital, Caleb filling out forms half asleep while Mila recovered, probably adding Eleanor without thinking because she'd been there, because she'd shown up at 3 a.m. and seemed like the kind of person who'd show up again. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Eleanor said, already walking toward her office. Tell Mila I'm on my way. She grabbed her coat and purse, told Rebecca to cancel her afternoon meetings, and was in the car before her assistant could ask questions. The drive to Whitman Elementary took 12 minutes through midday traffic, and Eleanor spent every second trying Caleb's phone. Each call went to voicemail immediately, phone off or dead battery, neither option reassuring. The school was in a neighborhood Eleanor knew well. She'd approved the budget for renovations to 3 buildings within 2 blocks. Whitman Elementary itself was old but well-maintained, with colorful murals on the exterior walls and a playground that looked recently updated. Eleanor signed in at the office and was directed to a small conference room where Mila sat in an oversized chair, her backpack at her feet, her face anxious. When she saw Eleanor, relief flooded her features. Eleanor, I knew you'd come. Of course I came. Eleanor knelt down to Mila's level, doing a quick visual assessment. The little girl looked fine. No injuries, no signs of distress beyond worry. How are you feeling? Still recovering from being sick? I'm okay now. The medicine worked. Mila's voice dropped to a whisper. But Daddy didn't come. He always comes. Something's wrong. Principal Matthews, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an air of capable authority, stepped forward. We've been trying to reach Mr. Brooks for over an hour. This is very unlike him. I understand. Eleanor pulled out her phone and tried Caleb again. Voicemail. She thought for a moment, then dialed a different number, one she shouldn't know, but had looked up after their coffee date in case of emergency. Davidson's Auto Repair. Davidson's, this is Jerry. Hi, I'm looking for Caleb Brooks. Is he working today? A pause. Who's asking? I'm a friend. His daughter's school called and they can't reach him. I'm trying to find out if he's still at work. Another pause, longer this time. When Jerry spoke again, his voice was cautious. Caleb's not here. There was an accident this morning. He got taken to Harborview about 2 hours ago. The world tilted. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. What kind of accident? Is he okay? Car fell off a lift. Caleb was underneath doing an oil change when the hydraulics failed. He pushed the customer's kid out of the way. Stupid kid shouldn't have been in the bay, but took the impact himself. Jerry's voice was rough with worry. Broken leg for sure, maybe some ribs. They took him in an ambulance. I tried calling his emergency contact, but the numbers disconnected. Thank you. Eleanor's mind was racing. Harborview, you said? Yeah, tell him we're all thinking about him, and his job's secure, whatever he needs. Eleanor ended the call and looked at Principal Matthews. Caleb's been in an accident. He's at Harborview Medical Center. I need to get Mila and take her to see him. Of course. The principal's expression shifted to concern. Is it serious? I don't know yet. Eleanor turned to Mila, who'd gone very pale. Hey, look at me. Your dad got hurt at work, but he's okay. He's at the hospital, and we're going to go see him right now. Is he going to die? Mila's voice was small, terrified. Like Mama? Eleanor's heart cracked. No, sweetheart. No, he's going to be fine. I promise. She shouldn't make promises she couldn't keep, but Mila needed certainty right now, needed someone to be strong and sure. Come on, let's go find your dad. The drive to Harborview took 20 minutes. Mila sat in the back seat of the Mercedes, silent and scared, her small hand clutching Eleanor's. Eleanor held on tight and made phone calls with her free hand, to the hospital to get information on Caleb's status, to her physician to ensure he'd get the best care, to Rebecca to explain why she wouldn't be back today. Should I reschedule tomorrow's acquisition meeting? Rebecca asked. Yes. Reschedule everything until I tell you otherwise. Eleanor, the Singapore investors are only here for... I said reschedule. Eleanor's voice was steel. Handle it, Rebecca. She ended the call and focused on Mila, who was staring out the window with tears tracking silently down her face. Eleanor had no experience with children, no instinct for the right words in moments like this. But she knew about fear and loss and the desperate need for someone to be steady when your world was falling apart. Tell me about your book, Eleanor said gently. The one you're writing about the princess who doesn't want to be a princess. What happens next in the story? Mila sniffled. She runs away to the forest and meets a talking wolf who's actually nice, not scary, and the wolf teaches her about being brave. What does the wolf say about being brave? That being brave isn't not being scared. It's being scared but doing the thing anyway. Mila's voice steadied slightly. Like going into the forest even though you don't know what's there. That's very wise. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Your dad's brave like that. He got hurt protecting someone else. That's the bravest kind of brave. He always protects people. Mila wiped her eyes with her free hand. He protected me when Mama was sick. He made everything okay even when it wasn't okay. Loves you very much. I know. Mila looked at Eleanor directly. Do you love him? The question landed like a physical blow. Eleanor opened her mouth to deflect, to give some appropriate adult non-answer, but Mila's eyes, Sarah's eyes, full of grief and hope and the desperate need for truth, stopped her. Yes, Eleanor said quietly. I do. Does he know? I don't know. Maybe not yet. Mila nodded like this made sense. You should tell him. Mama always said the important stuff shouldn't wait because you never know how much time you have. Out of the mouths of children. Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes and blinked them back fiercely. Your mama was very smart. I know, everyone says that. Mila leaned against Eleanor's shoulder. Will you stay with us? At the hospital. I don't want to be alone. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor promised. Not anywhere. Harborview Medical Center was one of Seattle's premier trauma hospitals, and Eleanor's physician had already smoothed the way by the time they arrived. A nurse met them at the emergency entrance and escorted them directly to the third floor where Caleb had been moved after initial treatment. He's stable, the nurse explained as they walked. Broken tibia, 3 cracked ribs, some bruising. He was lucky. Could have been much worse. He's awake and asking for his daughter. They reached Caleb's room and Eleanor paused at the door, letting Mila go in first. The little girl ran to her father's bedside, careful not to jostle him, her face transforming from fear to relief. Daddy, you're okay. Hey, baby. Caleb's voice was rough, strained with pain, but his smile was genuine. His left leg was in a cast, his torso wrapped in bandages visible above the hospital gown. I'm okay. I'm sorry I scared you. You didn't come get me from school. Mila's voice shook. I thought something really bad happened. Something did happen, but I'm okay now. Caleb looked past his daughter to where Eleanor stood in the doorway. His expression shifted, surprise, gratitude, something deeper that made Eleanor's breath catch. Eleanor, you came. The school called. I'm listed as Mila's emergency contact, apparently. I added you at the hospital Saturday. I should have asked first. I'm sorry. Caleb shifted slightly and winced. Thank you for getting her. Thank you for being there. Eleanor walked into the room properly, taking in the monitors and IV and all the evidence of how close this had been to being much worse. What happened? Hydraulic lift failed. Customer's son was in the bay when he shouldn't have been. 12 years old, curious, stupid timing. The lift started to drop and I just reacted. Pushed him out, took the hit myself. Caleb tried to shrug and gasped with pain. Kid's fine, I'm mostly fine. Could have been worse, could have been fatal, Eleanor said, her voice sharper than intended. The fear she'd been suppressing came flooding out as anger. You could have died saving someone else's child while your daughter waited at school wondering why you didn't come. Eleanor, Caleb started. No. She was pacing now, unable to stand still. You don't get to be cavalier about this. You don't get to mostly fine your way out of how serious this was. Mila's already lost one parent. She can't, Eleanor's voice broke. She can't lose you too. The room went very quiet. Mila was staring at Eleanor with wide eyes. Caleb's expression had gone soft and understanding in a way that made Eleanor want to run. You're right, he said gently. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. You saved a child's life. Eleanor stopped pacing, forced herself to breathe. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it. I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying. You're saying you were scared. Caleb reached out his hand toward her. Come here. Eleanor moved to the bedside, and Caleb took her hand, his grip warm and solid despite everything. I was scared too. My first thought when that car started falling wasn't about getting hurt. It was about Mila, about not being there for her, about leaving her alone. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. But I'm here. I'm okay. And you came for her, which means she wasn't alone. So thank you. You don't need to thank me. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. I love her. I love... She stopped, aware of Mila listening, aware that this wasn't the time or place for confessions. But Caleb understood. She could see it in his face, in the way his hand tightened on hers. We need to talk, he said quietly. About a lot of things. But not here. Not now. When you're better. When I'm better, he agreed. A doctor appeared in the doorway, older, competent-looking, carrying a tablet. Mr. Brooks? I'm Dr. Martinez. I've been reviewing your scans and I have some information about your treatment plan. Eleanor started to step back, to give them privacy, but Caleb held on to her hand. Stay, please. I want you to hear this too. So Eleanor stayed while Dr. Martinez explained the extent of Caleb's injuries, the surgery he'd need on his leg, the 6-week recovery timeline minimum before he could return to work. She stayed while Caleb processed this information, watching his face close down as the implications hit him. 6 weeks without work meant 6 weeks without income. 6 weeks of medical bills and no way to pay them. 6 weeks of trying to figure out how to care for Mila when he could barely walk. Eleanor saw him doing the math, saw the panic he was trying to hide for his daughter's sake, and made a decision. I'll help, she said when the doctor left. With whatever you need. Childcare, bills, rides to appointments, whatever. Eleanor, no. Caleb's voice was firm despite his exhaustion. You've already done too much. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Eleanor looked at Mila, who was curled up in the chair beside her father's bed, trying to pretend she wasn't listening. Mila can stay with me while you're recovering. My place has extra rooms. I can adjust my schedule to work from home more, and absolutely not. Caleb pulled his hand away from hers. I appreciate the offer, but Mila stays with me. Caleb, you can barely move. How are you going to take care of an 8-year-old when you're on crutches and recovering from surgery? I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. His jaw was set, pride and fear mixing into stubborn determination. We'll be fine. You don't have to be fine alone. Eleanor heard the desperation in her own voice and tried to moderate it. I'm not trying to take over. I'm trying to help. By taking my daughter away? By making sure she's cared for while you heal. Eleanor fought to keep her voice level. By being there for both of you the way you'd be there for me if the situation were reversed. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his expression cycling through emotions too fast to track. Finally, he looked at Mila. What do you think, baby? Do you want to stay with Eleanor for a little while? Mila's eyes went wide. Can I still see you every day? Every day, Eleanor promised before Caleb could answer. We'll visit your dad every single day, And once he's home from the hospital, we'll be there constantly. You won't be away from him, you'll just be sleeping somewhere else. And you'll take me to school? Every morning. And help with homework? Absolutely. Mila looked at her father. I think it's okay, Daddy. If you think it's okay. Caleb closed his eyes, and Eleanor saw him surrender to necessity. Okay, but just until I'm home from the hospital. Once I'm back at the apartment, we go back to normal. Deal. Eleanor felt relief flood through her. I'll take care of her, Caleb, I promise. I know you will. He opened his eyes and looked at Eleanor with an intensity that made her stomach flip. You're good at taking care of people, even when they're too stubborn to admit they need it. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, temporary guardianship paperwork, and rearranging Eleanor's life to accommodate a child. She had Rebecca clear her schedule as much as possible, moved meetings to early morning or late evening, and found herself in the bizarre position of setting up a bedroom in her penthouse for an 8-year-old. You'll need to childproof, Rebecca said when Eleanor explained the situation. Cover outlets, secure furniture, remove anything breakable from low shelves. It's a child, not a tornado. Have you met Mila? She's both. Eleanor ended up hiring a service to handle the child-proofing while she went shopping for things she'd never imagined owning. A child's bed, colorful sheets with unicorns, age-appropriate books, snacks that weren't just coffee, and protein bars. She stood in the middle of a Target aisle at 10 p.m., staring at choices between different brands of juice boxes, and had a small existential crisis about whether children preferred apple or fruit punch. She bought both. When she finally brought Mila home Wednesday evening, home to a penthouse worth $8 million with views of Elliott Bay and furnishings that cost more than most people's cars, Eleanor watched the little girl's face carefully for signs of intimidation or discomfort. Instead, Mila walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows and pressed her face against the glass. Wow! You can see everything from here. I bet you can see my school. Probably. Eleanor set down Mila's small suitcase, packed hastily with clothes that barely filled half the space. Do you want to see your room? I get a room, not just a couch. You get a room. Eleanor led her down the hall, past her home office and her own bedroom, to what had been a guest room and was now transformed into something a child might actually want to sleep in. The service had done good work. The walls were still neutral but now decorated with removable decals of stars and moons. The bed had the unicorn sheets Eleanor had agonized over, and there was a desk with art supplies and a reading lamp. Mila stood in the doorway, silent, taking it all in. Is it okay? Eleanor asked, suddenly anxious. If you don't like it, we can change things. I wasn't sure what you'd want, so it's perfect. Mila's voice was thick with emotion. No one's ever made me a room before, not since Mama died. Eleanor's throat tightened. Well, now you have one, for as long as you need it. They fell into a routine faster than Eleanor expected. Mornings began at 6:30 with Eleanor making breakfast. Simple things, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy because Mila wasn't fancy. They'd eat together at the kitchen island while Mila talked about her book or school or whatever was on her mind. Then Eleanor would drive her to school herself. No driver, because Mila didn't like the idea of being driven around by strangers like a rich person. The irony of that statement, coming from a child being housed by a billionaire, wasn't lost on Eleanor. She'd work from home until 2:30, then pick Mila up from school and take her directly to the hospital to visit Caleb. They'd spend 2 hours there every day, Mila doing homework in her father's room, Eleanor sitting quietly and watching the two of them together, feeling like both an intruder and an essential piece of something she didn't fully understand. Caleb had surgery on his leg Thursday morning. Eleanor waited through it, pacing the surgical waiting room like an expectant father, while Mila sat with surprising calm reading her book. When the surgeon came out to say everything had gone well, Eleanor cried from relief and Mila patted her hand and said, "It's okay to be scared. That's what makes it brave." In the evenings, back at the penthouse, Eleanor and Mila would make dinner together. Eleanor discovered she actually enjoyed cooking when it was for someone else. When Mila stood on a stool at the counter asking questions about why onions made you cry and whether garlic was really a vegetable. They'd eat together, then Eleanor would help with homework, rediscovering long division and spelling lists and the bizarre complications of third-grade social studies. Then they'd read together, curled up on Eleanor's obscenely expensive couch, working through The Lion, The Witch, and The Wardrobe. Mila would fall asleep against Eleanor's shoulder around 8:30, and Eleanor would carry her to bed, this small, solid weight of trust and responsibility, and tuck her in with a tenderness she didn't know she possessed. Then Eleanor would return to her laptop and work until midnight, handling the crisis of the day, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars, living her double life but with the balance shifting, the personal starting to outweigh the professional in ways that terrified her. On Friday evening, after 5 days of this new routine, Caleb was finally cleared to go home from the hospital. Eleanor and Mila arrived to find him dressed in real clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung loose on his frame, sitting in a wheelchair by his bed. "Ready to escape?" Eleanor asked. "More than ready." Caleb smiled, but it was strained, though I'm not looking forward to navigating stairs on crutches. About that, Eleanor had been dreading this conversation. "Your apartment building doesn't have an elevator, 3 flights of stairs. Your doctor said, I can handle stairs." Caleb's voice was defensive. "Your doctor said you should avoid stairs for at least 2 weeks. Eleanor pulled out her phone and showed him the email Dr. Martinez had sent her that morning after she'd asked about post-discharge recommendations. "It's not safe, Caleb." "So what do you suggest? I sleep on the landing?" He was frustrated, in pain, scared about going home to an apartment he couldn't navigate. Eleanor could see it all in his face. "Stay with me." The words came out before she could stop them. "The penthouse has an elevator. The guest room has an attached bathroom. You won't have to navigate stairs or worry about falling, and Mila is already there." Caleb stared at her. "Stay with you? In your apartment?" "Yes, just until you can handle stairs safely. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Eleanor." Caleb's voice was carefully controlled. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to go home. I need to be in my own space with my daughter." "Your daughter is in my space." Eleanor knelt down to be at eye level with his wheelchair. "And she's been asking every day when you're coming home. I think to her, home is wherever you are. The location doesn't matter." Caleb looked at Mila, who was standing quietly nearby, holding her father's hospital bag. "Is that true, baby? Do you want me to stay at Eleanor's place?" "I want you to be okay, Daddy." Mila's voice was small. "And Eleanor's place has a really comfy couch, and she makes good pancakes, and the building has a doorman who remembers my name." Caleb closed his eyes, and Eleanor watched him surrender again to circumstances beyond his control. "Okay, 2 weeks, but then we go home, regardless of what the doctor says." 2 weeks, Eleanor agreed, even though she knew she'd fight him on that timeline when it came. Getting Caleb from his hospital to Eleanor's penthouse was a logistical challenge that required coordination between hospital staff, building security, and Eleanor's driver. By the time they got him settled on the couch in Eleanor's living room, his leg elevated on pillows, pain medication within reach, Mila curled up beside him, it was past 9 p.m. and everyone was exhausted. "I'll order dinner," Eleanor said. "What sounds good?" "Whatever's easy." Caleb was looking around the space properly for the first time, taking in the soaring ceilings and designer furniture and the view that probably cost more per square foot than his entire apartment. His expression was difficult to read. "This is some property management job." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Here it was, the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Caleb, how much do property managers make anyway?" His voice was light, but there was an edge to it. "Because this place must cost what, $5,000 a month? 6? More?" "Caleb." Eleanor sat down in the chair across from him, her heart pounding. "We need to talk." "Yeah." He met her eyes directly. "I think we do, because I've been lying in a hospital bed for 5 days with nothing to do but think, and I've realized I don't actually know much about you, your job, your life, where you come from. You know everything about me, where I work, where I live, how much I make, what my late wife did for a living, but you've been really careful about not sharing much yourself." Mila had gone very still, sensing tension. "You're right," Eleanor said quietly. "I haven't been honest with you about a lot of things." "Is Eleanor even your real name?" There was hurt in Caleb's voice now, mixing with the anger. Yes, Eleanor Wright, that's my real name. She took a breath, feeling like she was standing on a cliff about to jump. But what I do? I didn't lie exactly, but I wasn't honest. I don't just work in real estate, I own a real estate development company, a large one. Caleb was very quiet. How large? Large enough that you've probably heard of it. Eleanor Wright Holdings. She watched understanding dawn on his face, watched him process the implications. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was trying to decide what to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. You're that Eleanor Wright, the billionaire, the one who was on the cover of Forbes last year. Yes. The one who owns half the commercial real estate in Seattle. Not half, maybe a third. Eleanor tried for humor and failed utterly. Caleb didn't laugh, he didn't yell. He just looked at her with an expression that was worse than anger, disappointment mixed with betrayal. When were you planning to tell me? When were you going to mention that you're one of the richest people in the city? I wanted to tell you so many times. At dinner, at the hospital. But you didn't. His voice was hard now. You let me think you were normal. You let me talk about money problems and worry about rent and feel embarrassed about not being able to afford things, all while you were sitting on billions. Do you have any idea how that feels? How completely humiliating this is? I never meant to humiliate you. Eleanor felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. I wanted someone to see me. Not my money, not my company. Just me. Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted. Caleb's voice was bitter. You got to play normal for a few weeks while I made a fool of myself, while I worried about how to pay for dinner and counted change for bus fare and tried to figure out how to keep my daughter fed on a mechanic's salary. You were probably laughing at... I never laughed at you. Eleanor's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. Not once. I admired you. I envied what you had. The authenticity, the real connections, the life you'd built without money solving every problem. I wanted what you had more than you could possibly imagine. What I had. Caleb's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Past tense, because this changes everything, doesn't it? Now you're not Eleanor who shared my table at a restaurant. You're Eleanor Wright, CEO, billionaire, completely out of my league in every way that matters. That's not true. Isn't it? He gestured around the penthouse with his free hand. Look at this place. Look at your life. You're not just rich, Eleanor. You're wealthy in a way I can't even conceptualize. This couch I'm sitting on probably costs more than I make in 6 months. That view probably costs more than my entire apartment building. We're not the same. We were never the same. And you knew that, but you let me think we were. Eleanor felt something break inside her chest. So what are you saying? That this is over? That we can't... I don't know what I'm saying. Caleb's voice cracked. I just know that I fell in love with someone who doesn't exist. The Eleanor I knew. The one who pushed Mila on swings and ate tacos from food trucks and worried about being late to pick her up from school. That person isn't real. That person was a role you were playing. That person is real. Eleanor was crying now, unable to hold it back. That's the realest I've been in years. Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. The money doesn't change that. The money changes everything. Caleb looked at his daughter, who was crying silently, watching her world fall apart again. Mila, baby, go to your room for a few minutes. Eleanor and I need to talk alone. Don't fight, Mila whispered. Please don't fight. I can't lose Eleanor too. The words hung in the air, devastating in their simplicity. Caleb's face crumpled and he pulled his daughter close with his free arm. You're not losing anyone, baby. I promise. But it felt like a promise neither of them could keep. Eleanor watched Mila walk slowly to her room, shoulders hunched, and felt the weight of what her deception had cost settling onto her chest like a physical thing. When they were alone, Caleb spoke first. I need time to think, to process this. But I can't do that here, in your penthouse, surrounded by your money, feeling like a charity case you took in. You're not a charity case. Eleanor's voice was desperate. You're someone I love, someone I want in my life. How? Caleb's question was raw, honest. How does this work, Eleanor? You go back to your billion-dollar empire and I go back to my auto repair job and we pretend there's not this massive imbalance between us? You buy dinner, you pay for things, you solve my problems with money while I, what, let you? Feel emasculated and useless? Watch my daughter get attached to a lifestyle I can't provide? I don't want to solve your problems with money. I just want to be with you. But you can't separate yourself from the money. It's who you are. It's how you move through the world. Caleb's voice softened slightly. And I'm not saying that's wrong. You built something incredible. You should be proud of that. But it makes us fundamentally incompatible. It doesn't have to. Eleanor moved to sit beside him on the couch, careful not to jostle his injured leg. We can figure this out. We can find a balance. Can we? Caleb looked at her directly. Be honest. What happens when I go back to work? When I'm at the shop doing oil changes for $40 an hour while you're in boardrooms making million-dollar decisions? When I take Mila back to our apartment with its peeling paint and broken elevator while you're here in your palace in the sky? How long before you start to see me as a project instead of a partner? That won't happen. You don't know that. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, that gesture of stress Eleanor had learned to recognize. I've had 6 months of people pitying me since Sarah died. I can't handle being pitied by someone I love. I'd rather be alone. The words hit like a slap. Eleanor stood, needing distance, needing to move. She walked to the window and stared out at the city spread below her like a map of her empire. Out there were buildings with her name on them, properties she'd acquired and developed, the physical manifestation of everything she'd built. And none of it mattered compared to the man on her couch, who looked at her like she'd betrayed him. Because she had. I'm sorry, Eleanor said quietly, not turning around. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the beginning. You deserved better than that. Yeah, Caleb's voice was heavy. I did. But what's done is done. Now we have to figure out how to move forward. Do we? Eleanor turned to face him. Move forward? Or is this where we end? Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was exhausted. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I know I can't make that decision tonight, in this much pain, while my daughter is crying in the other room because the adults in her life can't figure out their problems. Okay? Eleanor nodded. Then you stay here for your recovery like we planned. We'll be civil for Mila's sake. And when you're better, when you can think clearly, we'll talk again. Really talk. And until then? Until then, I'll try to be the Eleanor you thought you knew. No money, no company, no empire, just me. The problem is, Caleb said softly, you can't separate yourself from those things. They're part of you. And maybe that's the real issue, not that you lied, but that I don't actually know how to love someone whose world is so completely different from mine. Eleanor had no answer for that, so she just stood there at her window, overlooking a city she owned but couldn't control, and felt the future she'd been building slip through her fingers like water. In her room, Mila cried herself to sleep. On the couch, Caleb stared at the ceiling and tried to reconcile the woman he'd fallen for with the billionaire she actually was. And by the window, Eleanor Wright, CEO, empire builder, woman who could buy and sell companies but couldn't figure out how to save one relationship, finally admitted that sometimes money couldn't fix everything. Sometimes money was the problem. The silence that followed lasted 3 days. Not actual silence. There were words exchanged about medication schedules and physical therapy appointments and what Mila needed for school. But the real conversations, the ones that mattered, hung suspended between Eleanor and Caleb like a sword waiting to fall. Eleanor threw herself into being present in ways that had nothing to do with money. She cooked breakfast every morning, drove Mila to school herself, worked from the dining room table instead of disappearing into her office. She helped with homework and read bedtime stories and did everything she could to prove that she could be just Eleanor, not Eleanor Wright, billionaire CEO. But the tension was suffocating. Caleb was polite, grateful even, but distant in a way that hurt more than anger would have. He'd thank her for meals and accept her help getting to physical therapy, but he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Wouldn't let conversations drift beyond the practical. Wouldn't let her close. On Monday morning, a week after the confrontation, Eleanor dropped Mila at school and returned to find Caleb attempting to make coffee one-handed while balancing on crutches. She watched him struggle for a moment before stepping in to help, and something in him finally broke. "I can do it myself," he snapped, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry. That was unfair." "It's okay to be frustrated." Eleanor finished making the coffee and handed him a mug. "You're used to being independent. This has to be hard. It's not just the injury." Caleb accepted the coffee and moved carefully to the couch, his movements still stiff with pain. "It's everything. Being here in your space, accepting your help, feeling like I can't contribute anything while you're—" He gestured vaguely around the penthouse. "While you're taking care of everything." Eleanor sat in the chair across from him, maintaining careful distance. "I'm not trying to make you feel useless. I'm trying to help someone I care about." "I know, but caring doesn't change the facts." Caleb set down his coffee and looked at her directly for the first time in days. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting someone to see you instead of your money, and I understand that, I really do. But Eleanor, you can't have it both ways. You can't want to be seen as a regular person while living in an $8 million penthouse. You can't want a normal relationship while running an empire that affects thousands of people's lives. So what are you saying? That we're impossible?" "I'm saying we need to be honest about what this is." Caleb's voice was steady but sad. "You're not going to give up your company. I'm not going to suddenly become wealthy. And Mila," his voice caught, "Mila's going to get hurt no matter what we do. She's already attached to you. She talks about you like your family. And when this ends, why does it have to end?" Eleanor heard the desperation in her voice and hated it. "Why can't we figure out how to make it work?" "Because I don't know how to be with someone whose world is so different from mine." Caleb ran his hand through his hair. "Every time you solve a problem with money, and you do, constantly, without even thinking about it, I feel smaller. Every time Mila sees how you live versus how we live, I worry about what she's learning. That money equals worth. That what I can provide isn't enough. That's not what I think. That's not what I'm teaching her. Maybe not intentionally, but impact matters more than intent." Caleb's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah and I built our life on different values. We taught Mila that happiness comes from people, not things. That character matters more than wealth. But how do I maintain those lessons when she's living in luxury and seeing firsthand how much easier money makes everything?" Eleanor felt her own tears threatening. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend I'm not who I am? Give away everything I built?" "No. I want you to be honest with yourself about what you want." Caleb leaned forward, wincing as his ribs protested the movement. "Do you want a relationship with me and Mila? Really want it? Or do you want the idea of us? The picture of normalcy we represent, the escape from your lonely billionaire life?" The question hit like a physical blow. Eleanor opened her mouth to deny it, to insist she wanted them specifically, not what they represented. But Caleb's eyes were too knowing, too perceptive. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to separate what I feel for you from what you make me feel about myself. When I'm with you and Mila, I like who I am. I feel real in a way I haven't felt in years. But is that love, or is that just using you as an escape? That's the question, isn't it?" Caleb's voice was gentle now, understanding. "And until you can answer it honestly, we're just going to keep hurting each other." They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating the impossible gulf between them. Eleanor thought about the first night at Marcello's, about an empty chair and a desperate father, and a choice that had felt simple then but had become impossibly complicated. "I should go back to work," she said finally. "Really go back, not work from home, trying to prove something. I need to remember who I am separate from you." Caleb nodded. "And I need to go home, to my apartment, with Mila. Not right away. I know I'm not ready physically, but soon. Before we all get too comfortable with this arrangement that isn't sustainable." "Okay." Eleanor stood, feeling like she was giving up, but knowing he was right. "One more week. Then we'll figure out the logistics of getting you home." "One more week," Caleb agreed. Eleanor went to her office and did something she rarely did. She called her father. Richard Wright answered on the third ring, surprise evident in his voice. They weren't close, hadn't been since Eleanor's mother died, but he knew her better than almost anyone. He'd watched her build her empire, understood the drive that made her work 80-hour weeks and sacrifice everything personal for professional success. Eleanor? Is everything all right? I need advice. The words felt foreign. About something personal. There was a long pause. That's not usually your area of concern. I know, but I've met someone. Someone completely outside my world. And it's complicated. She explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out names and identifying details, but laying bare the central problem. Her father listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Your mother and I had a similar problem, he said finally. When we met, she was a kindergarten teacher. I was already CFO of the firm. The money difference was massive, though not on the scale you're dealing with, and it nearly destroyed us. Eleanor had never heard this story. What happened? She almost left me, said she couldn't be with someone who solved every problem by throwing money at it, who didn't understand that some things couldn't be bought. We separated for 3 months. His voice was distant, remembering. Worst 3 months of my life. Made me realize that she was right. I had been using money as a substitute for actual presence, for genuine connection. So I changed. Cut back my hours, started being home for dinner, learned to ask before solving, to listen before fixing. Did it work? We had 15 years together before she died. 15 good years. But Eleanor's... His voice turned serious. It only worked because I was willing to change fundamentally. Not just adjust my schedule, but change how I thought about success, about what mattered. And even then, the balance was precarious. When she died, I fell right back into work because it was easier than grief. You know how that turned out. Eleanor did know. Her father had become a workaholic after her mother's death, essentially abandoning his daughter emotionally while providing for her materially. It had taught Eleanor that money was safer than love, that professional success was more reliable than human connection. I don't know how to change, Eleanor said quietly. This is who I am. This is what I built. Then you need to decide what matters more, the empire or the man. Because Eleanor, you can't have both, not at the level you're trying to operate. Something has to give. After she hung up, Eleanor sat in her office for a long time, staring at the Seattle skyline. Her city, her kingdom, the physical manifestation of everything she'd sacrificed and achieved. Out there were buildings with her name on them, properties that would outlast her, a legacy that would be studied in business schools for decades. And here in her penthouse was a man and a little girl who might walk away, leaving her with nothing but the empire she'd chosen over them. The choice should have been easy. She'd spent 15 years building Eleanor Wright Holdings. She'd sacrificed relationships, friendships, sleep, health, everything to create something meaningful and lasting. Choosing one man and his daughter over all of that was irrational, emotional, the kind of decision weak people made when they let feelings override logic. But when Eleanor tried to imagine her life without Caleb's steady presence, without Mila's laughter and impossible questions and fierce hugs, the empire felt hollow. The buildings felt empty. Success felt meaningless. That evening, Eleanor made dinner, actual cooking, not ordering in, and called Caleb and Mila to the table. Mila chattered about school and her friend Emma's new haircut, and Caleb contributed when prompted but mostly stayed quiet. They were 3 people eating together but feeling very separate, the fragile connection they'd built fraying visibly. After dinner, while Eleanor helped Mila with homework, her phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. The subject line read, "Urgent, Aurora Avenue acquisition." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Aurora Avenue. Caleb's neighborhood, the project she'd been avoiding thinking about for weeks. She opened the email and read Marcus's update. The deal was ready to close. The board had approved it. They were just waiting for Eleanor's final signature to begin acquisition and development. Timeline for renovation, 18 months. Expected displacement of current residents, 75% within the first year, including, almost certainly, Caleb and Mila. Eleanor stared at the email, then at Mila bent over her math homework, tongue poking out in concentration. She thought about Caleb's small apartment with its photos of Sarah and worn furniture and evidence of life being lived on a tight budget. She thought about Mila's school, her friends, the stability Caleb had fought so hard to maintain. She thought about her father's words, "Something has to give." Eleanor pulled out her laptop and started typing, not a reply to Marcus, but something else entirely. A proposal that would probably shock her board, that went against every business principle she'd ever followed, that would cost her company millions in potential profit. But it was right. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that what she was about to do was right. It took her 3 hours to write, refine, and attach the necessary documentation. When she finally sent it at nearly midnight, she felt both terrified and liberated. She'd just put her values ahead of her bottom line, something she'd sworn never to do, something her entire empire was built on not doing. She'd just chosen people over profit. Specifically, she'd chosen Caleb and Mila's neighborhood over her company's expansion. She didn't tell Caleb what she'd done. Not yet. She needed to see if the board would approve it first, needed to know if she could actually pull off what she was attempting before raising hopes that might be crushed. The next 2 days passed in a blur of negotiations and difficult conversations. The board was skeptical, Marcus was openly hostile, and Rebecca looked at Eleanor like she'd lost her mind. But Eleanor held firm, using every ounce of authority and persuasion she'd developed over 15 years to push through her alternative proposal. Instead of acquiring and developing the Aurora Avenue properties for maximum profit, Eleanor Wright Holdings would invest in community renovation, maintaining current affordable housing, updating infrastructure, supporting local businesses. Lower returns, longer timeline, but preserving the neighborhood's character and keeping current residents in place. It was radical. It was expensive. It went against everything real estate development stood for. The board approved it by a single vote on Wednesday afternoon. Eleanor immediately called a press conference for Friday morning to announce the new community-focused approach. Then she went home to her penthouse, to where Caleb was attempting physical therapy exercises on the floor and Mila was building elaborate structures with blocks on the coffee table. "Can we talk?" Eleanor asked Caleb. "Tomorrow morning, before Mila wakes up?" He looked wary, but nodded. "Okay." That night, Eleanor barely slept. She rehearsed what she'd say, discarded various approaches, tried to find the right words to explain what she'd done and why. But in the end, she knew that words wouldn't matter nearly as much as actions. She'd been all words for weeks now, promises to change, claims about loving him, insistence that money didn't matter, but she'd never backed it up with actual sacrifice. Tomorrow, that would change. She met Caleb in the kitchen at 5 a.m. before Mila's alarm went off. He was already there, making coffee, the routine they'd fallen into over the past week. His leg cast was still cumbersome, but he moved more easily now, his ribs healing enough that he didn't wince with every breath. "You're up early," he said, handing her a mug without being asked. "Couldn't sleep." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, gathering courage. "I need to show you something. It's going to be on the news this morning anyway, but I want you to hear it from me first." "Okay." Caleb sat down at the kitchen island, giving her his full attention. Eleanor pulled out her laptop and turned it to face him. On the screen was a press release scheduled to go live in 4 hours. Eleanor Wright Holdings announces revolutionary community first development approach. She watched his face as he read, saw confusion give way to understanding, saw understanding give way to shock. "Aurora Avenue," he said quietly. "That's my neighborhood." "I know." "You were going to develop it, buy up the properties, renovate, drive up rents, price out people like me." His voice was flat, stating facts. "That was the plan," Eleanor admitted. "I've had the proposal on my desk for 3 months. The board approved it. It would have been incredibly profitable." "Would have been." Past tense. Caleb looked up at her. "What changed?" "I changed." Eleanor sat down across from him. "Or I'm trying to change. The old version of me, the one who built this empire, she would have signed off on that deal without hesitation. Properties are properties, profit is profit, and personal feelings don't factor into business decisions. That's what I've always believed. And now? Now I can't separate business from personal, because my business decisions affect real people. People like you and Mila. That building we were going to acquire? Your building. your home. I was literally planning to price you out of your apartment while dating you, while taking care of your daughter, while falling in love with you both." Eleanor's voice cracked, and I didn't realize how fundamentally wrong that was until I tried to imagine actually doing it. Until I tried to picture signing papers that would destroy your stability while pretending I cared about your well-being. Caleb was very quiet, reading through the press release again. This new approach, maintaining affordable housing, community investment, supporting current residents, this is going to cost you millions in lost profit. Tens of millions, actually. Marcus ran the numbers. Eleanor tried for a smile. "He's not happy with me." "Why did you do it?" "Because you were right about everything." Eleanor met his eyes directly. "I can't separate myself from my money. It's part of who I am, what I built. But I can change what I do with it. I can choose to use my power to help instead of displace, to support instead of exploit. And I can prove to you and to myself that profit isn't the only measure of success." "Eleanor," Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. I don't even know what to say. This is your company, your empire. You built this for 15 years, and you're changing your entire approach because of me? Because of you and Mila. Because of everyone like you, people working hard, doing everything right, and still getting priced out of their own neighborhoods by people like me. Eleanor felt tears building, but let them come. Because I looked at who I was becoming, and I didn't like it. Because I realized I could own half of Seattle and still be completely alone, or I could own less and maybe have something real. Caleb reached across the island and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, everything she'd been afraid of losing. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me. But Eleanor, you can't make massive business decisions based on one relationship. What if this doesn't work out between us? What if we try and fail anyway? Then I'll have made my company better regardless." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "This isn't just about us. This is about doing business differently. About proving that profit and people don't have to be enemies. And yes, you inspired it. You and Mila showed me what I was missing, what I was destroying by only caring about bottom lines. But the choice is mine. I'm doing this because it's right, not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness." "I know." Caleb's eyes were bright with tears. "That's why it matters. That's why I believe you." They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked across the island, the morning light starting to filter through the windows. Eleanor heard Mila's alarm go off down the hall, heard small feet hitting the floor. "So what now?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Where does this leave us?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "You've changed your business. That's huge. That's incredible. But the fundamental problem is still there. You're a billionaire. I'm a mechanic. That gap doesn't disappear just because you're investing in affordable housing. I'm not asking it to disappear. I'm asking if we can bridge it." Eleanor's voice was steady, despite her fear. "If we can find a way to be together that respects both our values, both our lives. I'm not going to pretend I'm not wealthy, but I'm also not going to use my wealth as a weapon or a wall between us. How do we do that, practically speaking?" Caleb's question was genuine, searching for answers. "We set boundaries, we communicate. We let me pay for things sometimes because I want to and I can, but we let you contribute in ways that matter to you. We teach Mila that worth isn't measured in dollars, but we also don't pretend that money doesn't make some things easier." Eleanor took a breath. "We figure it out together, one day at a time, being honest about what's working and what's not." "That sounds terrifying." "It is terrifying, but I'm willing to try if you are." Caleb studied her face for a long moment. "You really love us, don't you? Not the idea of us, but actually us." "With everything I have," Eleanor said simply. "I love Mila's impossible questions and fierce heart. I love your devotion to her, your quiet strength, the way you see the best in people. I love how you both make me want to be better than I am. And I love that you challenge me, that you don't let me hide behind money or power or carefully constructed walls." "I love you too," Caleb said softly. "I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself and Mila from getting hurt. But I love you. And that terrifies me more than anything else. Because you lost Sarah." Eleanor understood now, finally understood the fear driving his resistance. "Because I lost Sarah," he confirmed, and because loving someone means risking that kind of loss again. It means being vulnerable, being open, trusting that the other person won't leave or hurt you. And with the wealth difference, with the fundamental inequality between us, that trust is harder. Because you could leave any time. You could walk away to your empire and your billions and barely notice we're gone. I would notice. Eleanor's voice was fierce. I would notice every single day. You and Mila aren't side characters in my story. You're the story. Everything else is just background noise. Mila appeared in the doorway, sleepy and disheveled in her unicorn pajamas. Are you guys fighting again? Because if you are, I'm going to need you to stop. Fighting makes my tummy hurt. Eleanor and Caleb both laughed, the tension breaking. We're not fighting, baby, Caleb said. We're actually figuring things out. Good. Mila climbed onto the stool next to her father. Because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have some ideas. You have ideas? Eleanor couldn't help but smile. About us? About all of us. Mila's voice was very serious. You and Daddy are making this too complicated. It's actually really simple. Do you want to be a family or not? Out of the mouths of children. Eleanor looked at Caleb, saw her own emotion reflected in his face. Yes, she said, I want to be a family. Want? Me too, Caleb added quietly. Good. Then you are. Mila said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Family isn't about where you live or how much money you have. It's about choosing each other every day. Mama taught me that before she died. She said family is who shows up when things are hard and who celebrates when things are good and who loves you even when you're being annoying. That's very wise, Eleanor said, her throat tight. I know. I'm 8. Mila grinned, then turned serious again. But you both have to promise something. Promise you'll keep choosing us. Not just when it's easy or when it makes sense, but even when it's hard and scary and you don't know if it's going to work. Eleanor and Caleb looked at each other. In his eyes, Eleanor saw her own fear reflected back. The terror of committing, of being vulnerable, of risking everything for something that might not last. But she also saw hope and love and the willingness to try. I promise, Eleanor said. I promise, Caleb echoed. Good. Mila hopped off her stool. Now, can someone make me pancakes? All this family stuff makes me hungry. The press conference that morning went better than Eleanor expected. She stood in front of cameras and reporters and announced Eleanor Wright Holdings' new community-first approach, fielded questions about profit margins and shareholder reactions, and explained her vision for development that served people instead of displacing them. Why the change? One reporter asked. Eleanor Wright Holdings has always been known for maximizing returns. This new approach seems to go against your entire business model. Eleanor thought about Caleb watching from her penthouse, about Mila at school probably drawing pictures of unicorns, about the choice she'd made that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with values. Because profit isn't the only metric that matters, she said clearly. Because cities are made of people, not properties. And because I finally realized that the kind of success that leaves people homeless isn't success. It's just greed dressed up in business language. The quote went viral. By evening, Eleanor Wright was trending on social media, some praising her new approach, others calling her naive or questioning her business acumen. Her stock price dipped 2%, then recovered, then stabilized. She didn't care. She went home to where Caleb was attempting to make dinner one-handed, and Mila was setting the table with exaggerated care, and she felt more successful than she had after closing any billion-dollar deal. The next 2 weeks were a careful dance of figuring out how to be together. Caleb moved back to his apartment when the doctor cleared him for stairs, and Eleanor helped him navigate the move without taking over. She paid for a few modifications to make the apartment more accessible during his recovery, a grab bar in the bathroom, a shower chair, better lighting, but she asked first and accepted when he said no to other suggestions. They fell into a new routine. Eleanor would come to Caleb's apartment 3 nights a week for dinner, taking turns cooking, learning to be comfortable in his modest space without constantly comparing it to her penthouse. Caleb and Mila would come to Eleanor's place on weekends, and slowly Caleb got more comfortable there, learned to see it as just where Eleanor lived instead of a monument to inequality. They set boundaries about money. Eleanor paid for big things, medical bills, Mila's upcoming birthday party, a family vacation they were planning. Caleb paid for small things, coffee, takeout, movie tickets. It wasn't equal, but it was equitable. They were both contributing what they could, both showing up, both choosing this life they were building together. Eleanor cut back her hours at work, delegating more to Marcus and Rebecca, accepting that she couldn't do everything herself. She missed Mila's soccer games only once in 2 months. She was there for bedtime stories, for school plays, for the ordinary moments that made up a life. And slowly, painfully, honestly, they built something real. 3 months after Caleb's accident, on a Saturday afternoon at the playground where this had all begun, Eleanor watched Mila on the swings and felt Caleb take her hand. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "That's usually dangerous," Eleanor teased, but her heart was pounding. "I want to do this right. Not rush into anything, but not run away from it either." Caleb turned to face her fully. "I want us to be a family, officially, eventually, when the time is right." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Like marriage?" "Like marriage. Not now. Mila's still adjusting to having you in our lives, and I want to make sure we're solid first. But someday, if you want that too, I want that." Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "I want all of it. The ordinary life, the family dinners, the homework help, the fights about bedtime. I want to be Mila's stepmother. I want to be your wife. I want to choose you both every single day for the rest of my life." "Good." Caleb smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made Eleanor's heart skip. Because Mila already has an entire wedding planned. She's very detailed. There are spreadsheets involved. Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Of course there are. She's 8 going on 35. Just like someone else I know." Caleb pulled her close, careful of his still healing ribs. "I love you, Eleanor Wright, billionaire, CEO, empire builder, and the woman who shows up to push my daughter on swings. I love you too, Caleb Brooks, mechanic, father, survivor, and the man who sees me even when I'm trying to hide." They kissed while Mila shouted from the swings that they were being gross in public, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Peace, belonging, the knowledge that she'd finally found what her billions could never buy. A year later, on a crisp October evening, Eleanor and Caleb got married in a small ceremony at Marcello's restaurant. The same table where they'd first met held their wedding cake, tiramisu, naturally, because Mila had insisted. The guest list was small: close friends, Caleb's parents, Eleanor's father who cried through the entire ceremony. Mila was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd helped design and carrying a bouquet that included dandelions because that's what Eleanor gave me first, so it's traditional now. She took her job very seriously, scattering petals with mathematical precision and announcing to everyone who'd listen that she'd known they'd get married from the very beginning, even when they were being stubborn about it. Eleanor wore a simple white dress, no designer label, because Caleb loved her in simple things. He wore a suit he'd bought himself, refusing Eleanor's offer to pay for something more expensive, and he looked more handsome than any man in $1,000 tailoring ever had. When they exchanged vows, Eleanor promised to show up, to be present, to choose people over profit every single day. Caleb promised to trust, to be vulnerable, to let her love him even when it scared him. They both promised Mila that they'd be a family, messy and complicated and real, but always choosing each other. Antonio, their waiter from that first night, had tears streaming down his face as he served their wedding dinner. "I knew it," he kept saying to anyone who'd listen. "I knew when she gave up her table that night. I knew they were meant to be." After dinner, Eleanor and Caleb stood at the same window where Eleanor had once watched them drive away in a cab, feeling empty and alone. Now Caleb's arm was around her waist. Mila was holding both their hands, and Eleanor felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food or wine or celebration. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, just for her. "For showing up that night. For choosing us." "Thank you for being worth choosing," Eleanor replied. "For teaching me what actually matters." "What actually matters?" Mila piped up, because she never missed a conversation. Eleanor knelt down to her stepdaughter's level. People. Love. Family. Showing up for each other even when it's hard. Being brave enough to be vulnerable. All the stuff you can't buy but that makes life worth living. "That's good," Mila said seriously. You should write that down for when I get married someday and need wisdom. You're 8, Caleb protested. No one's getting married for a very long time. I'm just planning ahead, like you always tell me to. Mila grinned. Being prepared is being responsible. Eleanor and Caleb exchanged a look over their daughter's head. Because she was their daughter now, legally and emotionally and in every way that mattered. And in that look was everything they'd built together, everything they'd survived, everything they'd chosen. A year ago, Eleanor had been sitting alone at a restaurant, stood up by a blind date, feeling sorry for herself. Now she had a husband who challenged her to be better, a daughter who saw the world with fierce clarity, and a life that was messy and complicated and infinitely more valuable than any empire she could have built. She'd given up some profit margins. She'd changed her company's entire approach. She'd sacrificed some of the single-minded focus that had made her a billionaire. And in return, she'd gotten everything that actually mattered. That night, in the apartment they'd bought together, not a penthouse, not Caleb's old place, but something in between that felt like theirs, Eleanor tucked Mila into bed and read from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They'd finished it weeks ago, but Mila liked to hear favorite passages again. Eleanor? Mila's voice was sleepy. Do you think Mama would like you? The question caught Eleanor off guard. I hope so. From everything your dad's told me, she sounds wonderful. She was, Mila yawned. I think she'd be happy Daddy found you, because he smiles now, like he used to before she got sick. And I think she'd like that I have someone who helps with homework and comes to my soccer games and makes really good pancakes. Eleanor's throat tightened. I'm honored to do those things, and I promise I'm not trying to replace your mama. I know I can't. I just want to be someone who loves you and your dad very much. You are, Mila said simply. You're Eleanor. That's enough. Later, lying in bed with Caleb, his arm around her shoulders, and the quiet sounds of Seattle filtering through the window, Eleanor thought about empty chairs and second chances, about the randomness of a missed reservation and the choice to offer a table to strangers, about how one moment of kindness could reshape an entire life. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. About fate, about choices, about how grateful I am for traffic jams and dead phone batteries and desperate fathers who show up at restaurants begging for tables. Caleb laughed softly. That was not my finest moment. I was so desperate, so scared I'd break my promise to Mila. It was your finest moment, Eleanor corrected. You were a father who kept his word, who did whatever it took to make his daughter's birthday special. That's the man I fell in love with. And you were a woman who saw two strangers struggling and chose kindness over convenience. That's the woman I'm honored to call my wife. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that spoke to deep contentment. Eleanor thought about her company, about the community-first development model that was slowly proving successful despite initial skepticism. She thought about the buildings she owned and the families who lived in them, about the legacy she was building that was about more than just profit. But mostly she thought about this, the ordinary miracle of lying beside someone you loved, knowing your stepdaughter slept safely down the hall, knowing you'd wake up tomorrow and do it all again. The simple routine of a shared life that somehow mattered more than any billion-dollar deal. I love you, she said quietly. I love you too, Caleb replied. Billionaire. Mechanic, Eleanor shot back, the old teasing familiarity comfortable between them. We're pretty strange as couples go, Caleb observed. The best ones usually are. Eleanor nestled closer. Besides, we make it work. Yeah, Caleb agreed, his voice soft with contentment. We really do. And they did. Not perfectly. They still fought about money sometimes, still navigated the complications of blending Eleanor's high-profile career with their desire for privacy, still worked to teach Mila about values and worth, and the difference between price and value. But they showed up for each other every day, choosing love over fear, vulnerability over protection, partnership over independence. The empty chair at Marcello's had become a full life. The loneliness had become belonging. The carefully constructed walls had become open doors. And Eleanor Wright, billionaire CEO who'd thought she had everything, discovered that she'd had nothing until she had someone to share it with. In the end, that was the real success story. Not the buildings with her name on them, or the fortune in her bank account, or the empire she'd built. The real success was lying in bed with her husband while their daughter slept down the hall, knowing she'd finally found what money could never buy. She'd found home, she'd found family. She'd found love that wasn't transactional or conditional or dependent on her net worth. She'd found people who chose her not for what she could provide, but for who she was, flawed and scared and trying her best to be worthy of their trust. And somewhere in heaven, if such places existed, Sarah Brooks smiled down on her daughter and her husband and the woman who'd appeared in their lives like an answer to a prayer they hadn't known to pray. Because love multiplied, never divided. Because families could expand to hold new members without diminishing what came before. Because sometimes the best gifts were wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Sometimes they were wrapped in empty chairs at restaurants. Sometimes they were wrapped in second chances. Sometimes they were wrapped in the courage to be vulnerable enough to love, even when everything logical said it was impossible. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they were wrapped in all three at once.